covered from the neighborhood seas. And this has provided them with additional offensive military capabilities. The islands and reefs are capable of deploying modern fighter aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, and coastal defense cruise missiles. Radars are on. What are they intended for? Certainly not for a very peaceful purpose. There was a brief reference, I think, by the general himself, about the contemplated changes in the Chinese military setup and China's determination to transform the PLA into an effective fighting force. The structure of regional commands have been changed. I'm sure later on this will be explained in great detail. The number of seven relatively independent military commands have been reduced to 5, with provision for greater centralization. The Navy and the Air Force are to be assigned the same importance as the land forces, and a new command responsible for space and cyber warfare is to be constituted. A joint military command on the pattern of the US Navy is underway or has already been constituted. Then there is the issue of vesting of party control over the military. And today, President Xi's grips has not only become stronger, but he has anointed himself as Commander-in-Chief of the Chinese Armed Forces. What do all these really sort of lead to? I think it's a matter which I hope sometime will be discussed in the sessions to follow. China domestic, the military is probably better known. I think those who visit China, I don't know whether Harsh will accept this or not, do see heightened anxiety in China about the domestic scene. The economic downturn, the jitters emanating from China's equity and currency markets, the decline in growth rates, all seem to reinforce certain fears in the leadership about their ability to control events and retain their hold on power. Concerns also exist about whether the model of Deng Xiaoping, whether it has outlived its utility, and what does it sort of lead to as China seeks to transit to the new normal of slower growth. They're concerned that all this may provoke instability. And as it is, they still feel very concerned about what's taking place in Tibet and of course what is happening in Xinjiang. So there is a greater desire to invest in authoritarianism, if I might use that term, to prevent dissent or at least to still dissent, and at the same time stoke nationalist sentiment to counter possible subversion and sabotage. General Chaudhary and I are probably the only ones here perhaps who knew who were there when 1962 took place. Were you there, General, or not?
I was commanding a squadron, sir, in Ladakh.
Okay. At that time we misread what was meant by stoking nationalist sentiment. That was a time when China and the Soviet Union were beginning to go their different ways. And that's where the spirit of nationalism was stoked, and I think that's one of the factors that really provoked China to say that we'll teach India a lesson. So I'm not trying to be unduly scary about what is up to, but when there is a great deal of unified control, when there is concern, domestic concern, when there is worry that there may be a growth in dissent, then there may be ways to seek an outlet. I'm only mentioning that. But let me then go on to another matter which I think is of paramount importance not only to India, but to many other countries, the One Belt, One Road initiative. I think this deserves an entire seminar on its own. China's dream, or not China's dream, President Xi's dream, Chinese dream, I would say, posits the emergence of China on the global scene. I think it's being executed with greatest finesse, if I might say, through the grand strategy of the One Belt, One Road initiative. It signifies China's outreach from the eastern extremity of Asia into Europe. It knits together different strands across Asia, Eurasia and Europe. And I think it is truly awe-inspiring in its scope. And I do believe it has the potential to alter the status quo in the region. Every nation participating in the OBOR initiative, especially Pakistan, would now seem to be accepting a long-term commitment to China. With the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and the link to Gwadar port having received maximum attention, most people have lost sight of the fact that there are many other vital links in the chain. The proposed rail network in Nepal, the go-ahead for the $1.5 billion port city development project in Colombo, the green signal for the construction of a deep water port in Myanmar, together with the road and rail link between this port on the Bay of Bengal and Yunnan province of China. The OBOR initiative, funded by the 57-nation Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the $40 billion Silk Road Fund, has therefore the most tremendous potential in extending China's outreach. I'll come to the strategic implications next of all what I have just now said. With apologies to Harsh on the panel, His Excellency Mao, and of course Mr. Siddhant Kaur, I would stress the challenges more than the opportunities. The challenge posed by China is multifaceted. It's not limited to one or two or a few aspects. Any misreading of China or China's sense of its power, of its own power, can have grave consequences. I am part of the guilty men of 1962. At that time, we misread what China was capable of doing. It has few friends. It has probably more permanent enemies. What is often missed or underestimated is that China's relations with countries across the Asian region have a distinct anti-India focus. I say this not merely on my own, but I have had the privilege and the opportunities of talking to someone who did the opening to China for Nixon, Mr. Kissinger, and who was at that time a die-hard anti-India element, who has now at least apparently changed his views. So he has told me on more than one occasion, China sees India as its principal, I don't know whether you use the word enemy, but anyway, the principal country that they are worried about. So we should not forget this in the hope of increasing our trade from 70 billion to 100 billion. Well, I wrote that part of it when we went to China, but that's a different matter. I think it's important to have a proper comprehension of what constitutes China's core interests. So also the Chinese way of thinking and its methodologies to deal with problems and challenges. Today's Chinese exceptionalism is largely historical and revivalist. Kailash will agree with me on that, I hope. I see the combination of Mao's utopianism and Deng's realism, followed by China's rapid and claimed peaceful rise, as having produced the kind of authoritarian resilience that we see in China today under Xi Jinping. We must understand this contextually. As I stressed, the Chinese military holds the key to ensuring the success of China's grand strategy. Its military spending is now open, no secret any longer. It's over 216 billion. It's much larger than that of all other nations with the exception of the United States. But the reality is that while in actual dollar terms it's about 1/4 that of the United States, if it's done on purchasing parity terms, which I think Mao was mentioning many other points, but their defense budget is almost 70% that of the US defense budget. It's a huge sum of money. Chinese experts often talk of three distinct phases of Communist China's rise: 1949, 1950, 1968, 2008, and 2009 onwards. The defining characteristic of its third rise has very real consequences for nations on China's periphery. The maritime dimension has become critically important. The Asia Pacific and the Indian Ocean are now crucial areas of China's strategic interests. Immediately to its east, in the south and southeast, in the South and East China Seas, China is determined to ensure that not only territory which falls within its 9-dash line, but also strategic areas beyond remain firmly under control. Directly, as far as we are concerned, we must understand that the current Chinese emphasis on maritime imperatives does not mean any reduced interest as far as China's continental strategy is concerned. There is no diminution of China's interest as far as asserting its claims and rights to territories that it once claimed suzerainty over are concerned, such as Arunachal Pradesh in the eastern sector, to which General Chaudhary adhered a few minutes ago, pockets of the middle sector, and areas in the Ladakh sector, and with Pakistan's help extending beyond to Gilgit, Baltistan, etc. The only point of difference I have with you, General, was you talked about 8 points. Those 8 points are flashpoints. But the Chinese are very clear about the entire stretches of the border. Their view is that we held the territory and they produce maps. As all of us know, the Indians never had maps. So it's always very difficult to deal. We have descriptions but never maps. So the problem has been that all their claims, if you go to any sort of tribunal, would be saying that, okay, in the Qing dynasty, this is where we were, or in the Ming dynasty, where were you? Right? Most of that time we were under somebody else's control, but even the period before that. So it's not a point or 2 points that we have. I think they have a vision of the border. It's a question really of that we are the dominant power in the region. And please acknowledge this. We may, everybody talks about we can sort out the border dispute. Perhaps we can sort out the border dispute if we acknowledge that you are the major power. You concede that we take what we like and we will leave the rest to you. Mr. Daivengo used to talk to me, let's have a 70-30 sort of proportion in the differences. But we'll choose which should be the 70 and we'll give you what should be your 30. Now that's the problem that we run into. So I think we need to be careful to understand that the situation across the Asian region is also adding to China's concerns, and I think they will develop, or they are already developing, a surge capacity for marching towards the west, particularly because of the destabilizing conditions that are taking place. Then coming to the One Belt, One Road initiative. If you agree that strategic instability is intrinsic to Sino-Indian relations, then I am firmly of the view that China's One Belt, One Road initiative could possibly have the most debilitating impact on relations between India and China. I think we need to really understand this. Already, and notwithstanding everything that India has tried, we are clearly on the back foot. Clearly the odd man out in Asia, I would say, as far as the OBOR initiative is concerned. Several countries of Asia are supporting it in the hope of doing business with China. Many are beginning to see China as an economic model rather than as a strategic threat. India's concerns have few takers, thus underscoring its isolation. The Sino-Pak axis, to which General Chaudhary alluded, further cemented through the medium of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, also must be viewed as a major threat, as was highlighted by the General. Both countries have one common intent: undermining India's position in the region and beyond. While the multi-billion-dollar CPEC is the most visible symbol of their friendship, we are all aware of the below-the-radar assistance that is forthcoming to Pakistan from China in missile, nuclear technology, etc. Strengthening of this relationship is likely to alter the geostrategic landscape in the region, shutting India out from Afghanistan and Central Asia. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we cannot also be oblivious to the implications of the nationalist fervor sweeping across China, or at least being injected into China's body politic. The emergence of a personality cult around President Xi could even lead to Bonapartist tendencies. President Xi's reiteration of Mao's dictum about the need for absolute loyalty of the PLA to the Chinese Communist Party hence needs proper deciphering on our part, as the spillover could have grave implications for us and for other countries, including Japan and elsewhere. We must never forget the fact that China constantly seeks to achieve a strategic advantage or acquire a strategic advantage wherever conflicts exist. As China begins to pursue its ambitions to the West, utilizing the OBOR initiative at one level and exploiting allies like Pakistan on the other, we should be careful to see that this does not lead to unleashing of forces that can prove detrimental to India's interests. I would therefore conclude by saying that we need to keep our eyes open. We need to frame a policy that takes into account old friendships and old hostilities, as also the new currents that have been set in motion in China. We should avoid affecting costly strategic adjustments at this time. We need to manage relations as of relationship between equals. That happens when there is less asymmetry, both as far as military and economic capabilities are concerned. We are doing a great deal, I think, as far as our economic capabilities are concerned. But I have a niggling fear that India is according lower priority to erecting our defenses against China. One symbol I see in that is about raising an additional strike corps to deal with China. I think it sends the wrong message. We need to be firm at a time when China is beginning to flex its muscles. I know I've been negative, but I hope the message will go home. Thank you very much.
Thank Thank you, sir. Thank you for that excellent talk. May I now request Shri Harsh Pradhan to take the podium.
Good morning, everyone. So thanks to all our speakers who discussed the strategic aspects of India-China relations. I'll speak a little bit about the economic aspects and the international implications of the new emergent, strong and assertive China. And I will take a much more benign and lighter approach compared to Governor Narayanan. Perhaps
From an older man.
And perhaps my approach will be lighter because of as a consequence of my own naivete and sense of idealism. But I travel to China often for business and other events. And I've lived in Beijing briefly, where I was running one of my companies. I help organize a Beijing Energy Week in July every year, where representatives from different governments and companies around the world get together to discuss the future of energy and environment challenges that we face. And it's been fascinating for me to observe the evolution of China, especially in the last 5 years. There's been a significant change in the Chinese common mindset from a very domestic, inward-focused mentality to a desire now to really spread their wings further, learn, evolve, and better integrate into the world as a whole. There is an increasing tendency amongst the Chinese people now that I notice to discuss matters relating to politics and the government. As you all are aware, as the governor also mentioned, the last 1 year has been a very, very difficult year for China. There's been a slowdown in the economy, and there's been a sustained stock market crash. Now this is very important. It's very important to understand that the Chinese stock market is very different from the Indian stock market. The Indian stock market, most of the investors are institutions, mutual funds and other big organizations like that. The Chinese stock market, as per design of the Chinese government, is mostly investments of the common man. All the small local shopkeepers and everyone else in China, they invest in stocks, and that's the majority of the Chinese stock market. And when a crash happens like that and it's sustained, it hits everyone hard. And it hits the economy, and the consequences are very, very painful down to the grassroots. The banking system in China, as you know, is under a lot of stress, lots of bad loans. And it is only in tough times like this that people start questioning the status quo. They start looking for change, they start looking for improvement, they start wondering what is next. And I think China is going through the cusp of a major transformation as we speak. The topic of India and China is fascinating for me. I think there's just so much in common between our cultures. There's been significant historical interactions through trade, the spread of Buddhism through China into Japan, similar social and family values amongst the common people, and so on. And I, again, perhaps out of my own sense of naivete, I think the push and pull, the tussle between India and China is, I look at it as a form of sibling rivalry, as the Ambassador Ma just mentioned. I sent an email to a friend in Beijing a couple of days ago that I'm speaking at this India-China seminar in a few days. He immediately sent a reply back. I wish you all the best for the seminar on China-India relations. So this little tussle for predominance, I think, summarizes the relationships between India and China, and I think this will continue for the near future, perhaps even longer. But before we move on, I wanted to establish for you a brief background of the Chinese system of government. Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, always disliked democracy. He did not consider democracy to be an ideal form of government. He never wanted elections. He wanted a rotational model of leadership amongst a class of people, the elites. Now, who were these elites? They were a special group of people who were very intelligent, very learned, wise. They've been through rigorous practical and intellectual tests, and they've emerged from this with distinction. He said these elites, they should have been trained in mathematics for 10 years, they should have been trained in philosophy for 5 years, they should have had at least 15 years of military training, and then finally, after going through all of these tests, they can be selected to be the rulers of a country. It was a form of meritocracy that he was advocating, and any particular ruler would govern the country for a fixed period of time, hand over the leadership to the new successor, and then permanently retire from public life. In China, Deng Xiaoping, who was the paramount leader of China from 1978 till 1989, the architect of the modern Chinese economy, he seemed to have agreed with Plato. He didn't like democracy either, nor did he like the lifelong leadership of Chairman Mao. So when his time came, he created a system similar in China to what Plato had suggested thousands of years ago. He made a rule that no leader can lead China for more than 2 terms of 5 years each. And he created a very comprehensive national party school system, the Communist Party school system, where young people who wanted to get into the government in the future, they can enroll in the school and they'll be trained right from the beginning on how to rule, statecraft, diplomacy, how to run a country. And he said that these are skills which you have to know right from the beginning. You can't suddenly decide to become a politician one day and know how to run a country well. So all the knowledge and skills that are required to do your job well. And anyone who goes through this Chinese Communist Party school system may one day, if they do well, have a chance to lead their country. Plato also said that the world is not meant for equality. Now this is a very important point, that the world is never meant to be equal. He said that every person is different. Everyone has a different character, different skill, different passion, different wisdom. He says that no two people are born alike, and everyone has a different natural aptitude, which fits us for different jobs. Now, this is very different from the modern Western philosophy, which promotes equality amongst people. So Plato says that every person is different. You should do whatever job is appropriate for you, but he also makes one very important point that everyone should mind their own business. You do what is your job and forget about what the other person is doing. So he creates this 2-tiered society, 2 classes of people. A general public who can possess private property, who can work, who can raise a family, trade, and an elite class of people who want to dedicate their lives to serving their country as decision makers, as soldiers, and so on. But he says to prevent these people from corruption, they have to live in a communal style. They have to live only amongst themselves. They cannot do business, they cannot own any private property, they cannot even raise families. They're like priests in a temple, wise and completely dedicated to their nation. And he says that for having access to such great power, this is a necessary sacrifice that you have to make. To some extent, this is what the Chinese have tried to do. Create this utopian system, which, as one finds out from a reading of history, is very difficult to implement. And even if you do implement, it's very difficult to sustain. So this system works only if each group of people really minds its own business. The ordinary citizens of the country remain politically unconcerned, focus on their commercial enterprises. And the elites focus only on diplomacy, administration, and stay away from all commercial work. So the success of this great Chinese experiment, and I will call it that, an experiment of Deng Xiaoping, it depends on whether the ruling elite of China can maintain sufficient self-discipline to prevent moral deterioration, especially in the absence of natural checks and balances. There's no independent judiciary, there's no free elections. So without this natural checks and balances in the system, it's very important to maintain the sense of moral uprightness of the Chinese leadership, and that really will define the future of China. And without that, I am certain it will be very difficult for the Chinese model to sustain. I mean, it will sooner or later implode if the leadership does not restrain itself. So all the things that we talk about now, the impact of China, the worry that China will have an impact on the world and other countries, all this will fade away if this aspect is not addressed by the leadership of China. Now, as China becomes a major world power, the economy grows, it gains significant influence in the world, it will naturally become a lot more assertive. And this has a significant impact on countries around the world. Some impact, of course, is psychological. It has a vast economy, vast military, vast defense spending. But even before that, the major countries around the world are seeing a significant impact on their economies due to the vast manufacturing machine that the Chinese have created. And an impact on the economy hits home hardest and hits home earliest. It affects GDP growth, it affects jobs, companies go out of business, investments are written off, perhaps leading to social unrest, perhaps leading to changes in the governments and leaderships. So the international ramifications of the arrival of China are many, and they are very, very significant. Now I want to elucidate this point a little further by giving you a very specific example. Let's look at the steel industry, long considered a core part of any strong economy and an absolutely essential raw material as far as national security is concerned. Across the world today, you see steel companies losing money, shutting shop, going bankrupt. Even the low-cost steel scrap recyclers of Europe are not able to compete with lower-cost Chinese imports. Local companies are shutting shop and Chinese products are gaining market share around the world. You've all seen in the news the Tata Steel asset sale. ArcelorMittal, the world's largest steel company, announced an $8 billion loss in February, blaming Chinese competition. US Steel has cut 5,000 jobs in the last 1 year, and they're saying more cuts are expected. But if you look at it from the Chinese perspective, the Chinese economy has slowed down and they themselves are going through their own fair share of pain. The manufacturers there are desperate, they're selling at rock bottom prices to keep their own factories running, to repay their own debts, to prevent layoffs in their own country. And hundreds of Chinese steel plants are just limping along, hurt by low prices. It was in the news recently that the chairman of Dongpei steel plant in China hanged himself to death in March just before his company defaulted on debt repayment obligations. So it's not that China is enjoying at the expense of other people. Everyone is suffering at the hands of the economic downturn that the world faces. So now this discounting of commodities is the crux of the backlash that the world faces. Many countries are protecting themselves by imposing anti-dumping tariffs and duties. Now this is a very important point to understand. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. As per WTO rules, any country can impose a tariff if they can prove that goods are being dumped upon them. Dumped means the goods are being sold at a price below cost. Cost estimation is very difficult for goods produced in China. The true costs are obscured by government policy. Sometimes companies receive below market interest rate loans. Sometimes companies receive free land if they create jobs and such things. And as per WTO norms, the Chinese economy is classified as a non-market economy. So when you have a non-market economy, a country like India or any other country can use a proxy country, say Poland or Thailand or South Africa, and say this is the cost of manufacturing in that country, let's extrapolate to China, and hence this is the real cost of manufacturing in China. And you can prove that, say the country is selling below cost and hence is dumping, and hence we are imposing this perfectly legitimate anti-dumping duty. Now this is very important because this anti-dumping duty which is being imposed on Chinese products around the world is what is preventing a lot of the economic hit that the country would have to take otherwise. India has an anti-dumping duty against Chinese steel products at the moment. In December of this year, December 2016, this non-market economy tag for China is expiring. China is doing everything it can, lobbying very hard to make sure it gets labelled as a market economy when a new label is put. And once that is done, and if that is done, it will become very difficult for any other country to impose an anti-dumping penalty on Chinese-made products. So the impact on economies will be very, very significant, a lot more significant than we see right now. Now this is a very real example of how the world is changing, and the world will change around an economically strong and increasingly assertive China. You can already see the international reactions. US presidential candidate Donald Trump and political groups in Europe they're all speaking out against free trade. They're saying it hurts the domestic workers, it hurts the domestic economy. They're accusing China of currency manipulation, dumping, unfair practices, and so on. Tata Steel's asset sale announcement put 11,000 British jobs at risk. There were calls for an emergency session of parliament. You're hearing this everywhere. As we saw, China is going through its own fair share of pain. So it's not clear who's right, it's not clear who's wrong, it's not clear what the way forward is. But it is very clear that the world is changing very fast around us. Now, what are the learnings for India? What is it that we can do? Now, I'm reminded here of a humorous story about the way business is done in India. It's a joke. There was a fence being built around White House, and so Washington DC had asked some people to bid for it. 3 companies bid for it. One from Bangladesh, one from China, and an Indian company. So the Bangladeshi engineers came and they measured the area and they figured out how big the fence would be, and they say our quote is $900, $400 for material cost, $400 is my labor cost, $100 profit, $900 is my quote. The Chinese people came in, they did their own measurements and everything, and they said our quote is $700, $300 for material, $300 for labor, $100 is my profit. The Indian person comes in, he does no measurement, nothing, he goes straight to the government official and says, my quote is $2,700. And the government official is angry, you haven't done your homework, you haven't done any measurement, and you're giving me this outrageously high cost. What is the meaning of this? Saying, sir, it's very simple. $1,000 for me, $1,000 for you. We'll outsource the job to the Chinese. They quoted $700. I'm sure you know who got the contract finally. But jokes aside, all of this will have to change. I've always believed that competition is good, especially if the competitor is stronger than you. It forces you to improve, it forces you to adapt, it forces you to change. And this is what we will have to do. Our country, our government, our armed forces, we'll have to take our game to the next level. Making it easy to do business in India, reforms, liberalization, better governance, less bureaucracy, reform in land law, labor law, better infrastructure, fast decision making, all of these things are things we will have to do, pull up our socks and improve ourselves so that we can really compete against people who are a little ahead of us at the moment. I've always believed that the future is very different from the past. It has to be. Otherwise, how do we adapt? How do we improve? How do we move forward? And every day has to be better than the one before. I do believe that with every passing day, we are moving in the right direction, we are getting better, and hiccups will always be there. But if we approach this bold new world that we are emerging onto with positivity and enthusiasm, I'm certain that we will surmount the uncertainties and create a world where everyone will win. And as we go about our business day to day and we hear the news, it's natural to be a little dissatisfied. Nothing's perfect. But I want to emphasize that it is this feeling of dissatisfaction that we should learn to value. I'm reminded of a story. There was one person who was leaving his home country forever. And he's leaving, he's at the airport, the immigration officer stops him and tells him, you born and brought up in this country, this is your motherland, why are you leaving? Are you not satisfied with the work and pay? He says, I'm satisfied with the work and pay. He says, are you not satisfied with the living conditions? He says, I'm satisfied with the living conditions. Are you not satisfied with the political leadership of this country? He says, I'm satisfied with the political leadership of the country. He's saying, why are you leaving this country then? And he says, sir, that's exactly the reason why I'm leaving this country, because I want to go to a country where I am allowed to be dissatisfied. And that is the strength of our country. And that is something that we should be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you for ending on that optimistic note. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we come to towards the end of the second session. And as you have all heard, that both the speakers have so beautifully painted a picture, which I really don't want to spoil with my brush. But I thought I'll probably focus in a few corners which had a few holidays perhaps because of the spectrum of this entire topic, which has actually taken the top slot of all strategic thinkers and we students of geopolitics. The world has not changed as much as it has changed in the last 2 decades. Just like an earthquake which sends tremors to the neighboring nations or neighboring terrain. Today, economic tremors are far more swifter, far more devastating, and cover much longer distances. This is what the digital world has actually done. Digitization has done to the world. So, what we are concerned about is, will China actually impede the growth trajectory of India, and what needs to be done? At times we are reminded about the 1962 debacle, but yes, it does haunt us once or twice. But I think it's good to, not to forget about it, so that our guards are not kept down. Because as we transit from the generation of Mr. Narayan and move towards Harsha and the ones who are going to come, this memory of the 62 debacle is going to fade gradually, and this is what brings us to why is China what it is today. Mr. Narayan talked about the humiliation China has faced in the last 150 years. I mean, right from the middle of the 19th century, 1839, if I'm not mistaken, was the first Opium War, followed by the second, and then the Sino-Japanese War, or the first Sino-Japanese War. They were really humiliated, and the scars are still visible. And therefore, China is a country which has been tampered, and it is strong and hard. And so don't just take things on the face value. You know, what we see, look at the stark difference of how China deals with different states. On one hand, you look at how she conducts herself in South China Sea with the littorals, who are so intrinsically linked with her economy. On the other hand, you look at the way she treats Bangladesh, she treats Sri Lanka, she treats Maldives, and she treats Pakistan. Isn't there a difference between the two? So, this is real politics, and China knows what she wants. And as far as we are concerned, we got to be on our toes. We need to do what we think is correct. There is no need to lean exceedingly towards any side. We need to keep our strategic space intact and rather cooperate, intensify our cooperations with Japan, Vietnam, Australia, Indonesia, so that our strategic depth increases. I just would like to speak a few lines on Japan. The time is short. If we look at the Battle of Midway, or let's look at the Pearl Harbor, for instance, 7th of December 41. Japan deployed 7 aircraft carriers and 23 submarines for that operation. So do not undermine Japan, because her industrial capability is something which has not been fathomed by the current situation. She is sharing the security umbrella, and she is going to come out of her shell. So these are Vietnam, on the other hand. So we need to look at these countries and intensify our cooperation with them. With China, if you go through their doctrines, it's all fine. Everything is fine. In fact, it is very interesting to read their nuclear doctrine. It is so well written, and it looks as if nothing can go wrong. But eventually, it is at that particular point of time when one man takes a decision, what does he want to do? A lot of doubts have come even regarding the nuclear doctrine, because once the ballistic missile defense has come in, the nuclear doctrine has also kind of become shaky, because China believes in no first use and retaliatory strikes only after it is proved that they have been attacked with a nuclear weapon. So these are some of the things we need to ponder about. All we need to do is go ahead with what we want, just like what China wants. Remember, strength respects strength, and there are no free lunches. So thank you very much for this, for being so patient and attentive.
Thank you, Mr. Narayanan. Thank you, former SECAN, Admiral P.K. Chatterjee and Harsh Poddar. I think today it is raining forthrightness and frankness by every single person. And I think it's a good thing for the audience. We must come to know what is exactly happening. Thank you very much, sir. Please carry your mementos and our letter of gratitude with you. When you go down, I will request the next session speakers to come up. At the same time, I would like to welcome our Minister of State External Affairs, General Dr. Vijay Kumar Singh, and Minister of State Independent Charge, Program Implementation, Government of India, who has just come in. He took the trouble from his very, very busy schedule. Parliament is in session to have come basically to address us during the valedictory address. We thank him. He's always been a sort of, what should we say, guiding light to people in Calcutta. He's been posted here before and he loves to come back again and again. Personally, we are always, rather I'm always glad to see him over here. And I think most of us are saying we expect you to, sir, talk just before lunch, sir. Please. The second session, sir, Chair, sir, as I said earlier, we need to start shaving off a minute or so from everybody speak, and perhaps the chair, the last chair gave a good example of shaving off 10 minutes from his time. So on to you, sir. General Mukherjee, sir.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great honor to be amongst you and to chair a session with such distinguished panelists. We have two panelists with us here today, Mr. Jayadev Ranade, former Additional Secretary of R&AW, an acknowledged expert on China. He is a member of the National Security Advisory Board, President of Center for China Analysis and Strategy. He is also a member of the Core Group of China in the Indian Council for World Affairs and a distinguished fellow at the Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies, IPCS Delhi, and also at the Center for Air Power Studies at Delhi. He has tremendous experience, 30 years experience in China, and he would be talking to you about China's ongoing military reforms and the emerged force structure. I'd also introduce Major General B.K. Sharma, who is again an acknowledged expert on China. He is currently with the USI and is the Deputy Director of Research over there. And he has a tremendous amount of experience, particularly in the field of net assessment and so on. He'd be speaking to you on India and China's strategic calculus. First of all, over to Mr. Ranade. If I could request if you could try and keep within the time.
Thank you, General Mukherjee. Let me thank first the
Eastern and Northeastern Regional Studies for inviting me here today, General Shankar Roy Chaudhary and General Roy. It's indeed a pleasure to speak to such a distinguished audience. I've got a very focused brief, I should say, which is China's military modernization. It's an extremely important initiative that has been taken by Chinese President Xi Jinping. It is probably the most critical initiative that has been taken, the most critical reform measure that has been initiated after the 18th Party Congress. Mr. Narayanan referred to the 18th Party Congress. It is a watershed, I think, in Chinese politics, or the second watershed in Chinese politics. And that is where Xi Jinping also unveiled the China Dream. The date of completion for the China Dream is the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, which is also the date by which they expect the military modernizations to be completed, 2020. There are three dimensions to the military modernization, I feel. One is the internal political dimension, the military, of course, and the third is the strategic. And all three dovetail into each other. So I'll try to give a snapshot in the short time that I have about the military modernizations and its implications. Particularly, of course, the implications for us. But before I start, let me just mention that the military modernizations are taking place in the backdrop of the hardening of the Chinese state. We are seeing a stiffening of the political apparatus, of the propaganda apparatus, of education, and of the society in China. And that has started since Xi Jinping took over and began concentrating power in himself. He is a princeling, very confident of his authority, sure of his background and his lineage as a revolutionary son, and he has taken along the country so far by tapping into the popular sentiment that exists of anti-corruption, etc. The move to reform the PLA actually started before him, and the drafts were finalized in 2011 when they proposed a reduction of 800,000 people. Obviously there was a resistance, and Hu Jintao, Xi Jinping's predecessor, could not push it through. He couldn't push it through for a couple of reasons. One is the resistance within the PLA itself, and the second was the lack of cohesiveness at the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party, where Jiang Zemin, his predecessor, was opposed to Hu Jintao, and he operated through a couple of his henchmen who were vice chairman of the Central Military Commission. But Xi Jinping was able to get around these differences and pull the army along with him. And how he did this, I think, is an illustrative lesson of how powerful Xi Jinping has become. When he started to try and implement the reforms, there was a lot of resistance from the officer corps of the PLA, as well as the institutions within the PLA. There was institutional resistance on matters of budget, on matters of turf, etc. But primarily the resistance was from about the 1144 general officers in the PLA. They feared being rendered redundant. They feared being pulled back to headquarters as they lost their posts outside. And though they were reassured that they wouldn't be demobilized straight away, they didn't want to lose their perks. And the biggest perk in the Chinese armed forces is the housing. They didn't want to lose that or the functional authority that went along with their jobs. So there was a resistance. And what Xi Jinping did was he initiated a campaign within the PLA to try and understand the advantages of a technologically upgraded and a downsized PLA. There were over 800 seminars and conferences convened across the PLA, and 900 surveys done, survey and opinions obtained from officers. Visits were undertaken to 700 military bases across China. And the two vice chairmen of the Central Military Commission traveled to all the 7 military regions to explain to middle and senior level officers the advantages of the reform, proposed reform. Very surprisingly, the Chinese media also publicized that Xi Jinping himself went to plateaus, mountains, plains, cockpits, etc. to try and win over the people and get their support. It was in the midst of, it was as this campaign was going on that Xi Jinping took a very risky step, and at the third plenum in October 2015, he brought the PLA within the ambit of the Central Discipline Inspection Commission. And here let me take you slightly back to before the 18th Party Congress. The climate in China was such that there was a lot of public anger against what they saw was the levels of corruption that were rampant in the army and in civil society and with the cadres, with the ostentatious lifestyle that was being followed, and army officers who were retired. Children of revolutionary leaders came out very, very unusually and protested against this kind of lifestyle and this kind of governance that they were witnessing in China. They said the party had lost its way. Xi Jinping factored that in. And the former Chinese president Liu Shaoqi's son became one of his key advisors, Liu Yuan, and said that the corruption in the PLA has to be sorted out. Xi Jinping took the risk, he bit the bullet and brought the PLA within the ambit of the Central Discipline Inspection Commission, which is the party's anti-corruption watchdog body. And they began moving very fast. The CDIC, the Central Discipline Inspection Commission, is chaired by another Politburo Standing Committee member. There are 7 of them who rule China. And he's an old school friend and also the son of a revolutionary cadre and a friend of Xi Jinping. He is Wang Qishan. And he spearheaded the campaign. And within months, the first senior PLA officer was felled, and that was General Ku Chunshan, who was a major general and in charge of the General Logistics Department. Very powerful department of the PLA. Shortly thereafter, a campaign began in the army and people were being identified and investigated. In between January and February 2015, 30 generals were placed under suspension for corruption. And let me here clarify that when in the Chinese system an officer is placed under investigation or under suspension, he is basically detained at a residence and held incommunicado until the charges are proved. So it's a fairly serious move. And by the end of December 2015, 4,300 PLA officers, or 30% of the PLA officer cadre, was under investigation. That was a step that Xi Jinping took, obviously to ram through the modernizations program. The last time that such a major effort had been undertaken was by Deng Xiaoping, when he disrupted the system of lifelong terms for the military region commanders. With this reform, Xi Jinping is trying to even turn around the lower level officers from one region to another. But the reforms themselves were extensive. And as I said, it was the second time in the history of the People's Republic of China that such a reform process was initiated. Now, in the reforms, there were a few major things that took place as the build-up began. And we saw in December 2015 that Xi Jinping felt that he could now begin actually implementing the reforms in the army. In September, a few months earlier, he announced at the podium at a grand parade that a reduction of 300,000 would take place in the PLA. He was essentially repeating, or rather preempting, what he was going to say at the third plenum, the next third plenum in October. And the moment that was done, Xu Zhiliang, who was the vice chairman, said all non-combatants would be eliminated, the PLA would be downsized, And very interestingly, senior military commentator at that time mentioned that the strength of the ground forces would be reduced from 860,000 to 360,000. In other words, he was hinting that in the future, the cut of 500,000 would happen. Let's see whether that comes through or not, but it's a major step for the army. Chinese military strategists have also said that the current ratio of 4:2:1 between the ground forces, the air force and the navy would finally come down to 2:1:1. Now that's a loss of control, loss of authority for the ground forces who traditionally dominated. In fact, they have been the PLA. The others have just been attachments, as it were. And it's only in the last few years that they were allowed to wear their own uniforms while serving in the General Staff Department. So this is the pattern that was to come in. And once the reduction started, they moved very fast. Of the 150 military academies in the PLA, there are 29 now. The military officers who were working in these military academies, or this academics who were working in these military academies and had been given military ranks, have been told that they will no longer have military ranks. So that was the first step that they took. Second was to merge the General Logistics Department and the General Armaments Department once again. The third was to separate the PLA Army, which is the ground forces, from the PLA Air Force, PLA Navy. So they set up what is called the General Command of the Army. Already for the last two defense white papers, as many of you would know, the PLA ground forces were being referred to as the PLA-A, and now it was established. But in the setting up of the General Command of the Army, an interesting point was the person who Xi Jinping selected to command this PLA General Command. He was the former Chengdu military region commander, Li Chuo-chang. And the reason Xi Jinping picked him is that this officer preferred to pick up his rank after the others, because he didn't want to kowtow, as the Chinese call it, or pay for getting a rank faster, which was the corruption that had crept into the PLA. So he got his ranks later, but this was recognized by Xi Jinping, who has now put him at the head of the ground forces. Obviously, there is going to be more, more of a cleansing, which is going to take place in the ground forces system. There was also the new rocket force which was created. The new rocket force essentially, I would say, is a renaming of the second artillery or China's strategic missile force that already exists. But Xi Jinping described this as a new type of force which, with counter-strike capability, which should have medium and long-range missiles available to it. From a reading of what we can see in the Chinese literature on the new rocket force, this is a force that will combine strategic and conventional missiles of over 300 kilometers range, and they will also be entrusted with the task of integrating, as they call it, or coordinating nuclear submarines and strategic aircraft. So it will be a force that combines the strategic and other assets of the Chinese armed forces. The third force was the support arm, the strategic support force, which was created. This has been placed under the command of a person who spent his entire career with the second artillery or the strategic missile force. And this force has been entrusted with the job of taking over technological reconnaissance, electric warfare, space-based warfare, etc., and to provide support to the other arms as and when required. These are the new forces that have come in. They're obviously looking ahead and going to move in a faster direction. They're changing the concept of warfare as the Chinese envisage it. The General Staff Department, which was actually like the chief's setup of the army, and controlled all aspects has been upgraded, something akin to an American Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that has been placed in the Central Military Commission, which explains why Xi Jinping has taken on yet another title of Commander-in-Chief of the Chinese Armed Forces. He was so far the President of China, the General Secretary of the party, the Chairman of the Central Military Commission. He is now also the Commander-in-Chief. And in this role, he actually exercises authority over the operational commands of the Chinese Armed Forces. I don't think he's going to actually be involved in the key details of the operations, but he will certainly be sitting in. He continues with the same director or the same general, Fan Fenghui. He is now the single point of contact and advice for the chairman of the Central Military Commission. When he reorganized the military regions, there were 7 of them, they are now down to 5. That has been done on a functional basis. The central region is the one that guards Beijing. The force ground personnel in the central region are fewer than the others, but they have more missile deployments and missiles in their inventory. The north, east and south are more outward looking and have a maritime charge. The west zone, which is against us, has primarily a continental role, but will also include in our anticipation maritime capabilities, and I'll explain to you why when I come to that. The PLA Navy and PLA Air Force will have less of a proportionate reduction. Second artillery will not be reduced at all because they added 10,000 people last time, so that will be split into the rocket and to the strategic support force. Let me come to the west zone, which I think is important, that's integral to us. It's more than half of China's land area, if you see, stretching this way, and 1/3 of China's military might. And this is where I think a reference was made by Mr. Narayanan to the OBOR. Some people say it's very boring, but anyway, the OBOR is a major strategic move by China. And it not only has the potential, in our case it has already begun bending the borders. Because the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is the 6th section of this One Belt, One Road. And the West Zone, which has been created, is geared to safeguarding the interests of China in Afghanistan, Pakistan and this region, possibly the link of the OBOR that goes to Kyrgyzstan also. The backbone personnel of the erstwhile Lanchao military region, which used to look after the Ladakh sector in the north, in addition to Afghanistan, Pakistan, were tasked in January 2015 to start learning Pashto and Urdu, indicating a long-term commitment in this region. After the signing of the agreement with Djibouti for a base there by the Chinese, it is anticipated that Djibouti would be placed under the control of the West Zone, where the commander is now Vietnam War veteran and a princeling and a fluent speaker in Arabic. The Djibouti region, once it comes under that, aircraft, particularly the Y-8 and IL-76 aircraft based in Xinjiang, will be able to fly directly without refueling directly to Djibouti, enabling them thereby to carry out electronic and aerial surveillance over the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. So for us, it's a very strategic development, the creation of this West Zone. It also heralds the way that the Chinese are going to move ahead. For example, the South Zone and the East Zone, which have maritime components deployed with them, will obviously expand the scope of their responsibility, expand their area of responsibility. So this is the pattern which is developing, a pattern that we will have to contend with, which will necessitate our own military leadership to change the way they think of future warfare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranade. That was a very comprehensive presentation and an excellent one. Over to General Sharma now.
Honorable General V.K. Singh, Shri M.K. Narayanan, General Roy Chaudhary, and distinguished panelists here. My perspective today is based on the 15 visits that I made in the last 3 years, out of which 5 were to China. And then I participated in BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and also at the Shenzhen Forum, which is sort of a kind of a Shangri-La dialogue which Chinese have initiated. Now, in my strategic perspective, based on the paucity of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to map certain strategic direction in which China is heading and leave the inferences to be drawn from there to the audience. And I would begin with, I'll cut this down and I'll begin with, we have to understand the Chinese mind that shapes its strategic behavior. And there, there is a coalescing and intersection of these 4 major things. The grandiose China dream, the victimhood, the century of humiliation, the siege mentality which stems out from its non-Han periphery on one hand and the 2 groups of islands, And then is this unfinished historical agenda which actually stirs up heightened cartographic consciousness. And there are 3 outcomes of this which we need to factor in. First is that they would actually assert for what they are claiming. They are not going to let go on that. The second issue that emerges from here is there is a fear of encirclement within Chinese themselves, and that creates mistrust, Chinese vis-a-vis others. And third is they are bound to whip up ultra-nationalism to promote some of these interests. Now, we all talked about China dream in the world, that they seek a multipolar world and China-centric Asia. And in that China-centric Asia, they do think that India can have a subordinate position. It's an important player, but they don't look at you as an equal partner. If you're ready to be accommodated as a subordinate player, they're ready to sup with you. And here they've already got all the road maps actually right till 2049 listed out, where up to 2012 it was, growing the power gap between them and the other competitors. And now we're looking at 2025, where they would induce that kind of a gravitational pull in the regional periphery and near abroad so that they can emulate Chinese model and in the meanwhile modernize their military. And the most critical window is between 2020 to 2049, where China would have reached a critical stage that it is now in capacity to play a bigger power game with the technological innovation and all. And the end state by the mid of the century that seek is realignment of interest in the global balance of power vis-a-vis United States of America. And for that, they are going to develop niche military technologies. And the bottom line here is maybe in this window, if there is an erring state which proves to be a stumbling block within the region for China's rise, use military might actually to discipline that state. And that is the window I feel is the critical window that India should be looking at, and therefore we have to bridge up that power asymmetry which is growing. Now, Chinese strategic guidance, they have a very unique concept of strategic space that revolves around domination of resources, location and influence, and they do not look at strategic space as confined by the geographical boundaries, but they look at it as a living space of the people which constricts and expands with the ebb and flow of comprehensive natural power. So their grand strategic orientation is a function of comprehensive national power, strategic configuration, what they call the Xi, and the strategic window of opportunity and the 24 character strategy. But the 24 character strategy is now being challenged by Xi Jinping as it has come out. And he is looking at 3 major things here. First is to float alternate economic architecture, alternate security architecture, and complement this with ultra-nationalism at home. So we are going to see a more and more assertive China in times to come. Now, as far as their economic outlook is concerned, they are the largest, they're going to be the largest economy. But since morning we've been looking at this biggest or the mega enabler of Chinese, economic momentum, and this is one road, one belt. And here I would like to see out of the 6 prongs that we talked about, one road, one belt, if you look at the Eurasian bridge, and I have served in that part of the world, with this, actually their timings to reach Europe will actually reduce by about, travel time will reduce from 4 to 1 week. In the meanwhile, if we are able to operationalize our Chabahar access to Afghanistan, Central Asia, and also operationalize North-South corridor, then we would also be actually cutting down tremendously on our cost and on our travel time vis-a-vis the Suez Canal route. Now, this is the only opportunity that India has to intersect or interact with the OBOR. On the other hand, the BCIM, I don't think we have the capacity and the leverages to be an equal partner on the BCIM side. But the most critical from the Indian perspective, geopolitically and security, is your CPEC. And in the CPEC, we all know what CPEC, how much money is being pumped in, how the importance of Pakistan in Chinese strategic calculus is going to increase. But what we need to do as far as CPEC is concerned, that we need to actually understand and discuss the implications of one road, one belt and CPEC. And there needs to be another session for that. What are the geopolitical implications, security implications, particularly in the Ladakh sector, where the strategic claims of Pakistan and China, they actually coalesce. Then, if you look at Indian Ocean is the only region where the continental part of the Silk Road and the maritime, they actually converge. Both Bay of Bengal axis and the Arabian Sea. Therefore, the strategic salience of Indian Ocean region in the Chinese mind is going to grow. And here, you look at that, they have already got number of commercial enterprises, strategic communication they are developing. Djibouti, we talked about this morning. Now, this is the fulcrum of the 2 new initiatives and the footprints that we need to actually watch in the Indian Ocean region in times to come, how they develop the critical infrastructure, what kind of political-diplomatic initiatives embark upon, wherein the countries of the region make political choices which are in congruence with Chinese interests, and what are the military footprints of all this. This may look to begin with very, very innocuous, but it's a matter of time that they will become more bolder in their military usage and in their military application. And that would actually tilt the balance of power in the Indian Ocean region to China's favor at our cost. Then another issue that I want to talk about, how China is creating an pan-Asian energy grid. And they've already got the Trans-Siberian pipeline, they're taking the resources from the Caspian Sea, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan. They've contracted already about 6,600 tons of uranium from Kazakhstan. This prospecting oil in northern Amu Darya river. So all this, and they have major stakes in the Hyderabad in Tajikistan. They would also be bidding in Pakistani segment actually for the construction of TAPI and IPI. So you will see more and more Chinese presence in Pakistan. Now here, India is a natural competitor for the energy resources in Eurasia. Therefore, Chinese policies in Eurasia, Afghanistan are going to be such that they can actually stamp or they can contain, restrict Indian forays into this space. From here, as we know that number of alternate financial institutions, we are also members there. So in nutshell, as far as economic outlook is concerned, India does assume importance in Chinese economic calculus as a member of new financial institutions, lucrative destination for exports to huge consumer market and destination for FDI. This is the leverage that is available with India. How we use this leverage, it is to be seen. Now, there are certain geopolitical imperatives which impact China's security outlook. It's like a rooster with a pot belly protruding into the sea. The heartland that's suffering from the relative sense of deprivation here, and this, authoritative capitalism coupled with the democratic aspirations of the people there, and if the Chinese economy falters, this is the fault line which can actually create problems for Chinese. Coupled with this is how do you classify the non-Han periphery, which occupies actually 60% of your territory, and the third is the coastline management, which is the economic center of gravity. And here I would like to flag the problems at Xinjiang, which is a strategic outpost, and you see three prongs of your one road, one belt, and your energy hub is actually in Xinjiang. And there is a very heightened risk of things going wrong in northern Afghanistan, Fargana Valley in Central Asia actually erupting, and this whole wave of violence radiating more towards Xinjiang, and that is why Xinjiang figures out very prominently in their what they call is the three evils: extremism, separatism, and terrorism. And coupled with that is Tibet. Now, Tibet may not be as much of a concern, but it does resonate very well with the international community as a matter of human rights. And Tibet is called the water tower of Asia, with 20 rivers emanating from there. So both from security point of view and from China's international stature, Tibet is extremely important, and they do see a Indian hand in Tibet problem, and therefore they are waiting for my discussions with the Chinese. They think that once Dalai Lama is not on the scene, Tibet will get resolved automatically. They would maybe a spurt of little bit of violence, but subsequently so they're waiting for Dalai Lama to actually move out of the scene and then probably assimilate Tibet. But till such time that happens, they are not in a hurry to resolve any boundary issue with India. Now, the biggest focus today is in the Western Pacific and East China Sea and South China Sea, which has become the center of gravity of the balance of power, and the threat perception that the Chinese feel, that they feel that there is an external hand to abet 3 E's in China to destabilize it, and they do perceive some kind of a grand encirclement design being viewed by United States of America and other allies, and in which they feel that India under certain conditions could very much be one of the participants in this grand encirclement design. So therefore they look at India as a swing player in the Indian Ocean region, and at one hand there is a policy of carrot, on another hand they are also using the stick to sort of to moderate India's behavior. So we got to actually very critically examine the evolving scenarios in the Indo-Pacific, particularly the Western Pacific, and see what are its ramifications for India and what policy choices we should make. And to just briefly state that it is India's larger national interest that Western Pacific should remain in a state of flux, because once that is specified, Chinese attention is going to come into the Indian Ocean region and will become more and more. Therefore, we have to craft policies which sort of keep China embroiled in the Western Pacific fiasco. As far as their security outlook is concerned, at CICA meeting in 2014 at Shanghai, Xi Jinping came with this new concept of, what new Asian security concept, San United States of America. This has been reinforced by the foreign ministers at the recently concluded CICA meeting, wherein they talked about the new regional security doctrine with Asian characteristics without United States of America. They've also passed this counter-terrorism law, and they've already deployed troops in Egypt. They do talk about no Cold War mentality, no zero-sum game, no conflict, no confrontation, etc. And they've also talked, very happily about that, how they've been able to resolve differences and pacify India-China border. They also have some joint patrols and other things and hotlines and some confidence building measures with United States of America. And they're using the forums like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and Shenzhen Forum, to promote these kind of alternate security concepts. All this sounds very innocuous, but my sense is that there is a great mismatch between intent, capability, and manifested behavior. And if you look at the sayings of Chinese leaders, that they think that the wars are justified outside China's border, what Mao said about pass flows from the barrel of the gun, and then Mao also said the war is the highest form of struggle for resolving contradictions of different types. And in white papers, including the recent white paper, they said we will surely counterattack if attacked. If attacked, where? Taiwan, Arunachal Pradesh, it's not necessarily that you're going to cross Macron line or you're going to actually go and sort of strike at Shanghai or Beijing. It's those claimed areas where if somebody strikes there, they are going to counterattack. And from here, if you look at the Defense White Paper of 2015, the terms which have been actually listed out for the armed forces, they're definitely more offensive in their outlook. For example, strategic deterrence to prevent disruption of China's rise, create favorable strategic posture for realization of China dream. They talked about force projection capability, nuclear counterattacks, and other modernization and jointness I'll not be talking about here. But what they talked earlier, that innocuous security concept vis-a-vis tasking of their own armed forces, it has a very strong offensive content. And recently I just read this book by Michael Pillsbury, who has actually said the 100-year marathon, China's secret strategy to replace America as the global superpower. And I was quite struck by these 9 principles of their strategy. I'll just read them out. Induce complacency to avoid alerting your opponent, manipulate your opponent's advisors, be patient for decades or longer to achieve victory, steal your opponent's ideas and technology for strategic purposes. Military might is not the critical factor for winning long-term competition. Develop a symmetric competitive advantage, recognize the hegemon and its behavior, never lose sight of encirclement paradox, the game of Go. Establish and employ metrics for measuring your status relative to other potential challenges, comprehensive national power in a net assessment model. And then last is, always be vigilant to avoid being encircled or deceived by other strategy. So there is an element of mistrust here. Though in a regional contingency they've been talking about active defense under conditions of informationalization. They've also got the war zone campaign, I did not talk about it. But the essence of their military strategic guidance, which is encapsulated in their literature, is these 4 elements I would like to highlight here. Continuous resistance from the front, make enemy passive. Continuous harassment in depth. Strike from flanks, go for outflanking maneuvers. And target or destroy the operational energy centers, that is the effect-based operation. And these aspects we need to somehow factor in our own military planning and in our own responses. And just about their defense spending is second defense spender, but CIPRI has said by 2035 they will actually overtake United States of America as the largest defense spender. These are some of the trends of their military modernization. I'll not talk about this because time is little limited. No, I just want to come over to Tibet here. They've got, massive info. The total population of Tibet is about 3 million plus. But you look at the railway lines, the roads, the widening, connection of passes, the logistic infrastructure which they are creating. And just last month I was in Chengdu. I spent about 5-6 days in Chengdu, and they took us to interior areas, and including some of the deployment areas of formation which are supposed to be coming under the Eastern Command. And I was struck with the scale and the quality of infrastructure that they have. So what we have to be really concerned about here is the single season capability of China to wage any military campaign against India is a reality, and we need to factor this in very, very importantly. Military region is already covered. 3 C's of our competitions have been discussed. Now how much more time I have? Okay, I'll just come here and I'll just say what is, as per my own assessment, what is China's India strategy. And it is grow-power symmetry. There cannot be 2 suns in one sky. Calibrated economic engagement, not India to accept a subordinate position and use Pakistan as a countervail, what they call is kill with a borrowed knife. Shrink India's strategic space in South Asia, Indian Ocean region. Entire smaller states, undermine Bhutan and Nepal as a strategic buffer. Indirect posturing in POK, liberate border and water issues. Neutralize Tibet card. Perpetuate two-front collusive hybrid threat dilemma. Maximize influence and freedom of maneuver in Indian Ocean region. Undermine Indian influence in Afghanistan. Go for new great power relationship with US and Russia, where India is not a central player. Consolidate on Sino-Russian alliance, and Russians are shifting away from us. Prevent Indo-US strategic nexus and scuttle India's entry in United Nations, NSG, SCO, UN resolution, etc. Now, what should be our response to all this? Very briefly, I'll say we have to, our number 1 focus should be on internal balancing. De-radicalization and political consolidation in Jammu and Kashmir is extremely important. Reclaiming Dandakarnya from the tribal belt and alignment of our security and development in Northeast with our Act-East policy. In external thing, we have to be preeminent player in South Asia, the net security provider, the vector of economic integration and a soft power hub here. We have to work on concert of democracies to balance Pakistan-China strategic nexus, have resumed initiate dialogue on the Indian Ocean region so that we remain a lead player here. Against Pakistan, very briefly, we have to go for major reformation of national security architecture. I do not have the time. We have to have a national security strategy and joint military strategy. And here, we have to address our operational hollowness, implement Make in India policy, fast-track development of border infrastructure. ISR capability is totally next, and we need to develop a symmetric, covert asymmetric capability against Pakistan. About China, I think we'll discuss it subsequently, but in nutshell, I just want to say that I would say that what this Pierre Wack, who is a transcendentalist, he said, in our times of rapid change and discontinuity, crisis of perception, the inability to see the novel reality emerging by being locked inside obsolete assumptions have become the main cause of strategic failure. We suffered one at the hands of Chinese, we do not have a second chance. So with these words, I think that during the question answer session and subsequently, I'll elaborate more on the strategic response that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Sharma. That was a really elaborate and wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Economic heartland. And in addition to that, out in the shop window as far as they're concerned, to Japan and to the United States. And therefore, protection of that, creation of the offshore islands and so on and so forth, is all part of that to try and give it depth. So priority number 1 for modernization and reform is the Eastern Seaboard. Along with that, Xinjiang, Tibet, and all the claimed areas on the Eastern Seaboard. So sovereignty was one. Secondly is modernity in terms of economics and military reform in order to achieve this. And thirdly is stability. Stability means keeping the Communist Party in power and ensuring that the reforms can go through. Chinese national military strategy, protect the party and safeguard stability. That is number 1. defend sovereignty and defeat aggression, modernize the military and build the nation. Everything is based on that. So the entire reform pattern is first geared towards the eastern seaboard. All others take a lower priority. So after the eastern seaboard comes Sinkiang, as brought up by General Sharma. Third, we come into play. So what General Sharma brought out to you earlier is that you must give priority to keeping these areas active for the Chinese is very important. The second aspect based on which the reform has come about is the concept of people's war still remaining, but people's war in a very large extent, and local war under high-tech and conditions of active defense, which are informationized. In other words, the highest possible priority to information warfare. Now, the next point that you must understand is that under this concept, you have the concept of rapid war, rapid resolution, series of crippling strikes directed at vital areas and key points. What it implies is, in terms of reorganization, the Chinese have literally, I would say the People's Liberation Army is a replica of the Russian army with modifications. Even today, 800 officers per year go to Russia for training. There are Russian advisors in the PLA. There are Russian scientists operating in China. I am afraid it's the Americans and the Western world that have pushed Russia into China's lap, particularly after Ukraine and Georgia and all that. The Chinese learned a lot from watching what happened in the Gulf Wars and Afghanistan and Georgia and Ukraine. And what they've realized is that you must paralyze the enemy's information system in order to progress. And you must be able to strike fast, deep from the line of march without looking for defeating enemy forces or overall defeating them, but to put across a lesson. And therefore a pattern of offensive, or should we say the pattern of organization for reform is forces that can deliver a punch, in other words the rocket force, the air force, the artillery. Along with that, special operational forces. In each military region today you've got a regiment's worth of special forces. In addition to that, each division today has a Recce battalion, organized on the pattern and functioning on the pattern of special forces. Each brigade group again has that pattern of special forces group. Jointmanship is now being emphasized across the board, which is why you've got the new concept of the theatre battle zone commands coming in. They have started following, based on the Americans and the Russians, the brigade concept. So divisions are all gradually converting onto brigades, which are high technology, very well equipped and modern brigades. Each group army has a rapid reaction force, and the rapid reaction force being at least one brigade. So what you'll find is gradually all divisions converting into brigades. At the moment, they have about 40 brigades and 40 divisions worth. Similarly, as I said, special operations group in each military region. Now you will get greater now that you've got a theatre command. You will have two special operations group in the Western Theatre Command, opposite. Aviation resources all built in under that, and in the maritime seaboard, that is the battle zones, the combat zones, theatres opposite the eastern seaboard would also have naval elements grouped. So everything functioning together. Information degrading a high-tech adversary's ability to process to gather information is viewed as an absolutely essential task. Each military region, even as of now, before they convert into these combat zones, have a full EW regiment One at Chengdu and another at Lanzhou, opposite. And so are all the other military regions. They emphasize on the necessity to cooperate with the Russians to the fullest extent, while considering the Russians to be a junior partner, much below them. I totally agree with both all the speakers up till now. India really doesn't figure at the moment as far as China is concerned, except as a future competitor, and therefore they must be kept subdued. So expect China to continue supporting Pakistan, to continue supporting terrorism against India from the Pakistani side, continuing to support the Northeast insurgents. Border dispute will not be resolved. Not in a hurry, and I don't see it happening in my lifetime or any of your lifetimes. China will exploit the river waters. Don't be surprised if in a couple of years they start building the Link Canal to draw out the Brahmaputra and other water from the rivers heading out elsewhere. There is no immediate war threat capable yet against India, but it's not that it couldn't happen. It just requires to be united. In reality, I would strongly advise all of us to forget the 30 division threat pattern. Now switch on to the high-tech mode, informization mode, and do not expect to see a force concentrating against you, ever. Expect forces to move rapidly and come and strike straight away as you carry out in an attack from the line of march and in counter-attack. That would be the pattern to expect, along with special forces coming in, along with airstrikes, along with missile strikes by the rocket force. The weaknesses of the Chinese. Conscription. It's a conscripted army. They're trying to make permanent cadres amongst the NCOs and a small limited cadre of officers. But the rest are all conscripted. Maximum 2 years tenure. How much are you going to teach them in those 2 years? Secondly, it's a one-child army. China is a one-child nation. And therefore, do not expect a pattern of performance accordingly. Thirdly, it's modernizing, and it's modernized quite a bit. But it's got a long, long way to go. Its priority is the Eastern Seaboard. Don't expect to see very much of modernization against us at this point in time. Fourthly, yes, a lot of money is being employed in their defense budget. But again, look at the size of their force. At the moment, 2.25 million is the size of the PLA. Plus you've got the reserves, plus you've got the militia. Everybody has to be paid. They also have a very large pay packet to be paid. As I said also, their priorities go elsewhere. One last point I do have to put across to you. Now with the Chinese concept going on to a fact that they would protect their economic interests abroad, please rest assured your back door in Myanmar is now open. Your back door is open. The entire corridor from Kuala Lumpur going up to Kunming is going to pass through your back door. And the Chinese are going to bring in elements to protect that corridor. Northern Myanmar is demographically as good as China. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think we heard a wonderful analysis of the military reforms from Mr. Ranade. I don't think you could have got a better analysis of the entire issue as you got from him. And insofar as General Sharma is concerned, I think he really defined as to what is and what is likely to happen and what can be. and the chair, of course, summed it all up. And I thank you all for a lovely talk and a forthright talk. But only thing that I may disagree over here in this is, again, I think we are making the Chinaman 10 feet tall, as we wrote in our approach paper. And finally, I am sure the minister is here, he is there for one more session. He is taking his notes back and will convey these things where it matters. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Please carry your memento and our letter of gratitude with you. And now it is tea time. We are half an hour behind time, and at this rate we will have to eat into our lunch time. The first first 5 rows, please take the door to your right, and the rows behind, please take the exit door. Go out and get into the cafeteria for your tea on this issue. Over to you, Ambassador Dasgupta.
Thank you very much formally from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to address these subjects. The first speaker will be Ambassador Ranjit Singh Kala. He headed the China division in the Ministry of External Affairs, dealing with the boundary issues. He is the author of a book, India-China Boundary Issues, which gives an excellent account also of his experiences in dealing with China. And he will speak about the Chinese perception of India. The next speaker will be Ambassador T.C. Rangachari, who spent 17 years in his career dealing with China. He was posted there during the Cultural Revolution, and he will address the question of India's China policy and the prospects for future relations. So I invite Ambassador Kala to take the floor first.
Narayanan and our hosts, and I would particularly like to mention General Bakshi for his very excellent arrangements which he has made for us. Before I begin my presentation for the afternoon, I would like to enter in 2 caveats. The first one is that please remember that the Chinese media, and when I talk about the Chinese media and its perceptions of India, the Chinese media is not a free media. It is restricted, and it usually prints what the authorities want them to print. So therefore, the views which they express need not necessarily be the prevailing view, but it may be, you can say, in a way, the view of the authorities at that particular moment in time. And secondly, what I would also like to mention is, the second caveat, is that political correctness often takes place or often takes precedence over preferred choice. So therefore, what you may read is actually reflecting only the political correctness of the particular point in time. Now, I mention this to you, but I'll give this 2 examples to you to illustrate what I mean by political correctness and also by what I mean of how the Chinese view changes. Take, for example, the Chinese view of Nehru. To begin with, in the early days, Nehru was likened to Chiang Kai-shek in the 1949 to 1950. And in fact, he was even mentioned as a person who is going to visit the United States. In fact, he was visiting the United States in 1949 as the United States summoning the new Chiang Kai-shek of Asia. Now, partly this was because they had a fair amount of ignorance about what Nehru actually stood for. Little did they realize that when he would go to the United States in 1949, that he would plead for the recognition of the Chinese communists. But that apart, in a short period of say 3 years, in 1954, you have the Tibet Agreement of 1954, the Chinese realization that you need Nehru, and therefore the view of Nehru changes dramatically. Here you have Zhou Enlai visiting Delhi and saying that he wishes to learn from Nehru about international affairs. And shortly thereafter, when Nehru visited China in October 1954, 1 million people turned out on the streets of Beijing. Now surely, in a short space of 3 years' time, you don't go from being a stooge of the Americans to being the Chiang Kai-shek of Asia to suddenly being received in Beijing and 1 million people turning out. So this illustrates to you that how often the Chinese press changes and how often the view also changes, depending upon the political requirement of the day. There again, when the Tibet revolt broke out, again Nehru gets vilified because they wanted to pin the blame on Nehru. So therefore, what you see in the Chinese view is not necessarily the correct view. It is perhaps the correct political view of the moment. On the other hand, if you look at the two countries, I think it's a mistake to think that we know China. And I think equally, it's a bigger mistake to think that the Chinese know about India. Take the general attitude towards life, for example. We in India, we believe in the soul, we believe in the Atma, and we believe that ultimately our aim is that the Atma should merge with the Paramatma. That is the ultimate. In the Chinese view, the soul is inside the body, and therefore to nourish the soul, you must nourish the body. Whereas our thinking is that we must indulge in fasts, we must do penance, and all for the betterment of the soul. The Chinese view is exactly the opposite. Take another example. The Chinese have very little regard for the written word. They believe more in the spoken word. We, on the other hand, are looking at things more in a very legalistic manner. It thrills us no end if we can get the written word, if we can get some general principles involved. As far as the Chinese are concerned, it's of very little consequence. There is a third difference, and that is the Chinese, in a sense, believe in reciprocity. If you are a friend, then perhaps this friendship has to be returned in equal measure. But this reciprocity cuts both ways. If you are an enemy, then Chinese can be very badly behaved people. They can give you no amount of trouble. So therefore, you have to be very careful when dealing with the Chinese. Now, let us fast forward to modern times. What do the Chinese think of India at the present moment? Pew took a poll recently. This is as early, I would say, as late as say July 2014. And the question was to the general Chinese public, how favorably do you rate India? The answer that was published was only 30% think favorably of India. But don't despair. The Chinese had a very unfavorable opinion of other countries too. For example, Japan only figures at about 5 to 6%. And in spite of all the friendship that they show for the Pakistanis, the Pakistani, figure was just 1% more than India. If we are 30, only 31% of the Chinese had a favorable view of Pakistan. This just shows that there is perhaps very little in common between us South Asians and the Chinese. On the other hand, just look at the kind of contacts that we have with the Chinese. There are approximately 120 million Chinese who are going as tourists in any single year. They spend up to about $104 billion abroad. How many of them come to India? About 175,000. The rest of them go to South Korea, they go to Japan, they go to Taiwan, they go to Southeast Asia, they go to Europe. Very little come our way. And as the Consul General was mentioning, look at the number of flights. There are only 83 or 82 between India and China per week. There are over 1,000 between China and South Korea. And if you work that out, that works out to be almost 125 to 130 flights daily. So you can see the kind of interaction that goes on. On the other hand, you go to China, you go to a travel agency, which is the most prominent travel agency there, the China Travel Service. It has about 125 tour packages for Chinese traveling abroad. And if you ask that I want to go to India, out of about 122 cities in China which have facilities for Chinese tourists going abroad, there are only 2 cities which carry any kind of packages for India. And of these packages, you will find, if you open the brochure, you will find a whole list of things which are listed there. Don't do this, be careful of this. And what are the things you have to be careful about? Don't go alone, you'll get raped. Don't go to such and such place, it's dirty, it's filthy, and so forth. So therefore, the kind of perception which the Chinese have is rather limited because of the limited kind of contact that is there. And I can give you a personal example too. When I first went to China in 1972, I was sitting in a restaurant in Guangzhou on my way to Beijing and had asked for breakfast. And with the breakfast, I asked for eggs and I asked for bacon. Everything else arrived, the bacon didn't. And on my insistence asking for the bacon, finally the manager came up and so told me that sorry, I can't serve you bacon because you're a Muslim. So I said, look, I'm not a Muslim, I'm far from a Muslim, just look at my passport, I'm an Indian and I'm a Sikh, I'm not a Muslim. But he insisted because they have very little idea of what Indians actually are and what Indians look like. And even recently, on a recent visit, walk into any shop. I walked into one shop and immediately I could, since I speak Chinese, I understand what the 2 sales girls were talking. They said, here an Arab who's walked in. So they have no idea of actually what happens as far as South Asia or India is concerned. Now let's come to more concrete, what we call indications. But what do they think about Indian democracy, for example? We say we are a democratic country and rightly we are very proud of the fact that we are a democracy. But on the other hand, there is a magazine of the Chinese Communist Party called Chushi. And on 10th of September, this is what it had to say about Indian democracy. And mind you, it's a very interesting point that they make is that they went actually into great detail about what Indian democracy is like. For example, they looked at all the members of parliament. And this is what they came up with. They said independent India has been ruled by the Nehru Gandhi family for 60% of the time. And in parliament, in the age group of 41 to 50, 37% of the MPs have inherited their seats. And in the age group of 31 to 40, 65% of MPs have inherited their seats. And those MPs under 30, all of them have inherited their seats. So what was the conclusion that the magazine came to? The magazine, and this is pretty widely read in China, the magazine's conclusion was, for a society still tainted with feudalism, which sets rules according to clan loyalty and personal worship, regular direct elections will not bring substantial differences. Now, maybe they were trying to justify their own system in the eyes of their own people. But the fact of the matter is that this is the kind of information which is being given about India and Indian democracy. So, the final conclusion which they came to was India is democratic in form, authoritarian in content, and disappointing in result. Now, let's see what they think about, for example, another important factor, and this is the trade impasse which we have between India and China. Now, as you all know, the speaker in the morning had spoken about, in rather rosy terms, the fact that India's Sino-Indian trade has touched $72 billion. But go a little bit more into detail. Of the $72 billion, the trade deficit is almost as large as $60 billion. So it is highly in the favor of the Chinese. But talk to any Chinese, what they call business person, or you talk to the what they call in the Ministry of Commerce, or you talk to an ordinary person on the street. What does he think about this? Well, he says, the problem is not ours. The problem is yours. And what's your problem? You have structural problems. Your trade is structured in such a way that we find it very difficult to bridge this gap. So don't blame us for the fact that if your IT is restricted or your pharma exports are restricted, the fault is largely yours. And what should we do about it? Well, you can't do anything about it because you have land problems, you have power problems, you have low skills, you have low productivity. That's the kind of thing that you get. Now, in a way, what the Chinese are saying perhaps is right, because let's take a simple fact. Today, India is a major trading nation, but perhaps we are the only major trading nation who does not have a trade negotiator, a full-time trade negotiator. The US has it, Japan has it, China has it, we don't have one. We have a Ministry of Commerce, we have a joint secretary, the poor chap I think goes from town to town, country to country trying to negotiate, but I think we've all been in service, we know joint secretaries are loaded from 9 to 9. Hardly I think he will get the time. So if this gentleman is going to push for opening of China, and if he is going to push our trade pattern as far as China is concerned, he is going to find it pretty difficult. So what happens? Most of our effort is episodic. I mean, in the sense that a prime minister visits or minister visits, yes, somebody will go there perhaps 2 weeks before, bring this to their attention, but this is the kind of thing that you will get. This is the Chinese perception of India, of India's negotiating tactics. Let's take the boundary question. I think my colleague will deal with it in greater detail. But recently, Chinese writings on the subject have brought out very interesting facts. According to them, the Chinese have three options as far as the boundary issue is concerned. First is the status quo, second is a compromise, and third is escalation. Now, as far as they are concerned, they say that they would prefer the status quo. And if the status quo is disturbed, this is what the writing says, Chinese position will become even more hardline. But why is this? Because for them, a compromise is not a suitable option. Why should they compromise? After all, if Xi Jinping says that China is a great power, we are a great military power, we are a great economic power, then how do you justify giving away southern Tibet to India? It doesn't make sense. So therefore, the question of a compromise doesn't arise. What about the question of escalation? Well, why should you escalate? Because here again it's another very interesting fact which is being brought out in this Chinese writing. He says for
escalation, we would be disrupting our proposal of one belt, one road. Because if we indulge in border disputes, escalation on the border, then how do we justify OBOR, which we are trying to expand not only towards Central Asia, but also towards South Asia? Because in that case, unfavorable conditions would be created, and because of OBOR, the value of the border areas would diminish. So therefore, they don't want any kind of escalation, because then that disrupts the policy of OBOR. And therefore, what should Chinese policy be? Again, in a nutshell, the basic answer is given that yes, sovereignty as far as disputes are concerned should reside with China. We will never give up the sovereignty of these areas, but we are prepared to shelve the differences, put the differences on a shelf, and we are ready to seek joint development. Now, this is an interesting development, because if you are ready to seek joint development, in other words, you don't want to disturb what is the situation on the ground. So therefore, if we can have joint development, perhaps joint development on the border areas or cross-border areas, then the question of a boundary perhaps goes into the background. It doesn't become so prominent as in their thinking as it used to be before. In any case, if you look at China, China's land borders are about 22,000 kilometers. They have about 14 countries, borders with 14 countries, 13 according to us, 14 according to them. The difference is POK. Now, they have settled the border with all countries except India and Bhutan. The only question that therefore arises is India. And therefore, if the question of joint development is there, I think this is something that we should think about, because if you can have joint development, then that lessens the security implications of that particular area. Now let's come to the other question, which again comes quite often, and that is as far as India's sort of moving closer towards the United States. Now, what do the Chinese think of this? Here, two views are expressed. One view is that this preferential treatment for India is actually a US desire to balance China's growing power and to contain it, and to make India a strategic counterweight to China. This is one view which comes out. And the second view is that India is too large a country and is too proud of its independence to become a camp follower of the West. The latter view, which I just expressed to you, is a minority view. You get it, but it comes far too less than the first view. The first view is the dominant view. So how should China handle this issue? The first thing is that in case India moves too closely towards the United States, as the People's Army Liberation Daily put it, if the US is laying out forces across Asia Pacific region in advance to contain the rise of China, then we would need to show two countries concerned the value of containing China. Value is put in a different context. Value is not that they would be benign about it, but then Chinese strength would also be demonstrated. So therefore, what should Chinese options be, particularly towards India? What should China do? Here, again, there are two views expressed. The first one is that China has to make it clear to India that a price has to be paid for taking what America offers. And the second view is that New Delhi has to be taught the costs associated with trampling on China's vital security interests. So therefore, what you find in their thinking is that perhaps we should use the stick more often, the carrot much less. But nevertheless, they are concerned as far as India's what they call relations with the United States are concerned. There was a very interesting study done by an American lady. She looked at all the articles which were published in Chinese army publications from the period 2000 to 2014, and she had certain keywords into it, like India was one keyword, Indian Army was another, Indian Navy was another. And she came and she showed a graph which was very, very interesting. For the period 2000 to 2004 or 2005, very little mention. The period 2006 to 2010, there's a sudden shoot up in the graph which indicates concern about the Indian Navy, about the Indian Army, etc. Now, why is this so? This is because this was the period when India was negotiating the civil nuclear agreement with the United States, and they were genuinely worried that India was moving too far and too close towards the United States, and therefore they started thinking about what is the Indian Army, what is the Indian Navy, exactly what kind of work they are doing, how they are recruited, what kind of training you have. Very interesting articles started coming. But since about 2012, again you see the graph going down. So perhaps the apprehensions of India moving closer to the United States lessened after that period. Now let's come to the last portion, and that is the Indian Ocean. What do the Chinese think about India and in the Indian Ocean? Again, the person who brought out the question of the Malacca dilemma was the Chinese President Hu Jintao when he was talking to an internal conference. So therefore, Chinese newspapers, Chinese press have tended to say that whoever controls the Straits of Malacca will have a stranglehold on the energy route of China. The Chinese think tanks in their discussions always use the term controlled by India over the Indian Ocean. It's a very interesting formulation which they use. They don't say that India is the dominant power, India is the power as far as Indian Ocean is concerned. They always talk in terms of the Indian Navy's control of the Indian Ocean. So therefore, what should be the Chinese attitude as far as this is concerned? Here again, there are two views. The first view is that of course the Indians are moving very close to the United States, and the fact that the Indian Navy in conjunction with the US Navy will be able to play a dominant role, and therefore China has to take this factor into account. But on the other hand, there are articles, there are views which are coming which are slightly contrary to this particular point of view. And this is a very interesting thing. They say that India's strategic interests and the strategic interests of the United States don't coincide. According to them, the US position on Pakistan and the Indian position on Pakistan will never reconcile. And therefore, this issue, the issue of Pakistan, will always divide India and the United States. Perhaps that is one reason why whenever the United States decides to give, for example, like in the recent past, they decided to give F-16 to Pakistan, this issue gets played up very much in the Chinese press. It also gets played up because the dateline very curiously is given as New Delhi, which shows that they are quite keen to push this thing as much as possible, so that this the coinciding of Indian interests and the US interests never takes place. And hence their feeling is that if this continues, it's very unlikely that this strategic interest will meet. But on the other hand, they also feel that India is a pragmatic power, and India, in conjunction with the United States, will create problems as far as not only the Indian Ocean is concerned, but also in South China Sea. Don't forget, in spite of all the pipelines which they are building, which I think General Sharma's map was showing, not only through Myanmar but also from the Soviet Union, from Russia, etc., none of these pipelines will be able to meet more than 11% of China's total energy requirements. The bulk of it will have to come by sea and will have to come from the Middle East. China's energy requirements from the Middle East are 27%, and it has to go across the Indian Ocean through the Straits of Malacca, and they know that there are only three choke points as far as the linking of the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific are concerned. That is the Malacca Straits, the Sunda Straits and the Lombok, and they know that this can be a problem. So we do have cards which we can play, but the fact of the matter is that this is something which the Chinese also realize. So just to sum up, what exactly do the Chinese say as far as perceptions of India are concerned? Firstly, I would say that their thinking is that India poses no major strategic threat. Very often they cite that their economy is 5 times larger, their defense budget is 3 times larger, and of the 5 spheres in which modern warfare can take place, that is land, sea, air, space and cyber, India is only present in 3. We are missing in cyber, we are missing in space. Second question, the Sino-US relationship is at such a level that the US will not intervene in India's favor if there is any conflict between China and India. The third factor is that China seeks parity with the United States. It does not think that India even deserves a mention as far as their strategic outlooks are concerned. Recently, you know, the Chinese State Councillor Yang Jiechi, he had published an article. This is an article called Innovations in China's Diplomatic Theory and Practice Under New Conditions. The entire narrative is based on their relationship, great power relationship, the relationship with Russia, etc. There is not even a mention of India. So as that, I think, sums up what is the Chinese perception. But as I mentioned to you earlier, please do remember that what they say is for the moment, it is directly linked to their political considerations of the day, and do remember the Chinese press is not free. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Minister, Mr. Governor, Mr. Roy Chowdhury. First of all, I want to thank Saras for inviting me back to Calcutta. Calcutta is a city, go back a little bit, before the East India Company took over. Contemporary descriptions at that point said that Bengal was so rich that all European visitors coming to Bengal found many roads leading into Bengal, but none leading out of it. And being the number 11 batsman this morning, I was reflecting on the very instructive presentations that have been made during the course of the morning. And it struck me that if some Bengali thought that he wants to restore that glory of Bengal, would it threaten Bihar? Would it threaten Assam if he has that dream? And when on the subject of Bengal, I also want to bring to your attention a book that was published in 2010, which, seeing so many young people, I would strongly urge you to read. This is a book titled Churchill's Secret War. And this was written by a Bengali but based in Germany, Madhushree Mukherjee. And it deals with the Bengal famine of 1943. 4 million people, according to the then British government in India, their statistics, 4 million people perished in that famine. And what is interesting about that figure is about the same time, Hitler was being accused of having exterminated 6 million Jews, which provided the rationale and the justification for the ouster of Hitler. So please reflect on it. It's a matter of history. It's now 70 plus years ago. But it's something that we as Indians studying our own history should pay attention to. One of the things that we have to be clear, I have several slides here and I don't have time to run through them, so I'm going to, in a very nutshell, give you what it is, what the presentation said. The presentation is available, you're welcome to look at it. But one of the things that I think we are very often doing is to conflate potential with achievement. There is a lot of talk about India having this great potential to become this or that, but we aren't there yet. We have to get there. And then many of the things that we are saying should be done, but is not being done for XYZ reasons, can be debated on substance. Today it's conception. And on conception, Kissinger, going back to the time when he made those secret visits to China, said that during that entire period of the negotiations, the trilateral negotiations, the long-term expectation of the United States vis-a-vis China was that this relationship would remain conceptual. That the real target was the negotiations with the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union. And it isn't till about 10 years ago that you started, even perhaps, yes, 2007 after the financial crisis and so on, that you started seeing this talk coming mainly from the Americans of the decline of the United States and China as a possible replacement for the United States. And there was a reference made to a book. Again, the Chinese are not there yet. And 100 years down the line, as Keane said, in the long run, they're all dead. So, we don't know. If you go back to 1916, where was the United States? Britain was then the imperial power. So, 100 years is a long time in history. The second thing is securitization. To see virtually every issue in the perspective of affecting security. How credible is that even as a tool of analysis? That's something we should reflect on. And one other thing. Sachin Tendulkar scored his 99th century against South Africa in 2011, beginning of 2011. But it didn't get to his 100th till 2012 against Bangladesh. In between there was a tour of Australia. Now, should we blame the Australians for not permitting him to score his 100th century in Australia? Australian job was to protect, or rather win the game for Australia. So if the Chinese are doing something, what is preventing us from doing whatever we should be doing if we think we should be doing that? Is it right to say that because China is doing ABCD, that is somehow an expression of an intent which is adverse to India? I pose this as a question, we need to reflect on this. Now, I come from a state which is second in wisdom only to Bengal, and that is Tamil Nadu. So I have been very clever. I have put the conclusions in my very first slide. Oops, what's happened?
So wisdom hitting it. The power shortage is coming.
I can't see it from here, but there is a summary of conclusions. The trouble is that the way this is placed, I can't read my conclusions, but it's there on the screen, and I'm going to summarize what I remember of what I wrote when I made that presentation. Basically, what I'm saying here in this entire presentation is, we shouldn't really be looking at 2016 or 2017, 1 year, 2 years down the line. Let's look 20 years down the line. Where would India be? Where would China be? And virtually all the projections that are made about India and China agree that India will be the third largest economy, and not in PPP terms but in market economy terms. And that's important because market economy is substance, PPP is simply a comparative figure, a kind of a percentage exercise if you wish. Also, and at that time, India would be around 30 trillion, China would be number one with 50 trillion, and the United States around 40 trillion. At that time, India is also going to have a population around 1.7 billion. Now, if you have two large economies accounting for something like 50 trillion and 30 trillion, and you are going to be contributing to the global growth in such a big way, would it not be the responsibility of two such large economic powers to ensure through cooperation global economic stability? So that's something that we need to reflect on when we talk in terms of how there is this inevitability of a conflict, which is why it becomes necessary that even if there are competing, conflicting demands of national interests on one side and the other side, then we have to find ways in which we can manage them. Insofar as what else does it say? Can I move that side? Is it possible to get closer to the screen? Chairman, it's okay. These problems that we have talked about are known to the Indian leadership and to the Chinese leadership. The issue of lack of trust and confidence, whether it is the boundary issue, whatever it is. These are all issues that are known. It doesn't mean that just because you know of a problem, the problem gets resolved. But the existence of a problem itself and the recognition of the existence of that problem is a step forward, so that we are able to address it. Whether or not we are able to resolve it today, at least we are trying to find ways and means of resolving it one day or another. And that is why I said here, India and China will need to work together in the coming to accommodate differing, even competing or conflicting interests in a cooperative arrangement. This is what Xi Jinping has to say, which is very similar to the kind of statements that the Indian leadership makes. So it's not as if Xi Jinping is saying something which is completely different from the way it is. And one very quick instance is something more later down in one of the slides, but let me make that point straight away. When we talk in terms of China wanting to change the world order, that's also India's objective. When we talk of democratization, of decision making globally, we are saying much the same thing in different words. And there is another slide down below which says exactly what Xi Jinping had to say in this regard. We are not trying to replace the existing international order. What we want to do is to make it more a reflection of the existing realities, give more powers of decision making and so on to emerging economies and emerging countries. That's not very different from what Indian leadership is saying. Now, this is what the aspiration, the dream, so to speak, is. This is something which was said by Professor Chi Hsien-Lian, who was the doyen of India studies in China, a great Sanskrit scholar and so on. When Mr. Pranab Mukherjee went to China, he awarded Padma Shri to Professor Chi Hsien-Lian. He is no more. Tianzhao, Tisha, that is to say, this is created by heaven, constructed by earth. This is the civilizational approach of Chinese scholars towards India. And throughout history and even presently, you will find a great deal of references to the value that they attach to India as a civilization. And this is what Prime Minister Modi had said, you're all familiar with it because it just happened last year. And this is what the joint statement says, which again talks in terms of how we have a commonality of interest in working together. Now this I have also already mentioned to you about India-China towards 2050 for our own reasons. And this is something that all of us should think about and think about with some degree of concern. We're going to have a population of 1.7 billion in the next 20 years. How are they going to be employed? How will they have the skills to get employment? And if you're going to have a large number of people who are poor, already in terms of the UN indices, our own statistics, if you take the statistics of the former Planning Commission, something like 2/3 of India is below $2 a day. That's 600 plus billion. If you have a huge population which is unemployed, which is poor, how are you going to be able to govern this country? There is no police force, no army, which will ever be able to tackle if this lot of people converges on any issue, right or wrong, at any place. And we saw that during the Jat hesitation in Haryana. I'm sure there are other instances which others can replicate. So it is important for us to think of our own stability, our own economic prosperity, and the same problem exists in the case of China. This $10 trillion economy is fine, 6.9%, 6.5% GDP, which now they're talking this year as the new normal, is fine. But actually, if you listen to what the Taiwanese are saying, and we just had a delegation 2 days ago from one of the think tanks, which is very close to the newly elected DPP President Tsai Ing-wen. They said that this growth rate should actually be nearer 3% rather than 6.9%. But even at 3%, China's $10 trillion economy means that they are growing twice as large as 7% on a $2 trillion Indian economy. So let us realize that there is interest on both sides, for our own reasons on the Indian side, for their own reasons on the Chinese side, to have some kind of a cooperating arrangement so that they can focus mainly on economic development. This is just a chart to show you where, if this comes about, where would be India at that time will then be richer than UK, Germany and Japan put together. But we have to get there, we are not yet there. These are the shared objectives that India and China have, and this is all coming from various statements which have been made by the leadership on both sides, either on separate occasions or jointly. And that's bilaterally, regionally and globally. Again, there is a coincidence of views on India-China cooperation. There are statements here which have been made as recently as last month by the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Moscow, when our Minister Sushma Swaraj met him, and almost the same kind of thing has been said by our own Minister. Now, this is China's potential and India's need of investments. The previous government, Dr. Manmohan Singh, used to say always that India needs something like $1 trillion over a period of 10 years for infrastructure, just for infrastructure, and that's about $100 billion a year. Today, the Chinese have something like $3 trillion of foreign exchange. It was much bigger, but in the course of the last 1 year, there has been an outflow virtually at the rate of $100 billion a month. And even so, the Chinese today have the money. And as one of the later slides will show, the Chinese have set for themselves a goal of investments in South Asia. And currently, China's outward FDI is more than $100 billion. Obviously, all of that is not going to come here, much of it goes to Hong Kong. But even as promised, if $20 billion comes over the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, that is not bad from India's point of view. Indeed, something that we require. And these are all the details of various investments which the Chinese have made. or sorry, this investment the Chinese have promised to make, some of it has come in, others are coming in. There has been reference made to these financing institutions. If you see the ADB figure, there is an annual shortfall of $800 billion during 2010 to 2020 in Asian infrastructure development. This is the gap that they have. How does it matter to us if the Chinese give that money through a bank and some of that comes to India and give some money which comes bilaterally, so long as the money comes? Is this not what we are looking for with the United States? With Europe, there's not much money that's coming in there because Europe itself is in deep trouble. So if we can get this money, it's good. Please remember that 1.7 billion people, that figure. Now this is the target that the Chinese have set for themselves. Trade with South Asia, this is by 2020. $50 billion investment, $30 billion. And currently our trade, this is the Ministry of Commerce figures for the first 9 months, is 17.2 billion. So if you extrapolate it over 12-month period, this will be about 20 plus. The Chinese are looking at $50 billion. So first of all, in our own region, we need to be able to do as well, if not better than the Chinese. And the solution that I have for that is, India should consider the development priorities of SAARC partners as its own, so that we integrate them in our development planning, and to the extent to which the countries concerned are willing to accept and work together with India, we should have all of this as one sub-regional, and this is being done in the context of BBIN, the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal framework, because Pakistan is vetoing everything that goes in the SAARC framework. So this sub-regional cooperation is developed, and this is something which is going on close to 20 years now. Only now is it coming to some fruition. And again, in another context, if you are talking in terms of BCI, what is important from our point of view is that India should be able to have transit rights through Bangladesh from one part of India to another part of India to the northeast. Because without that, any kind of road, highway, whatever is constructed between India and China, what do you have in between that is going to, after all you have to connect the sources of production and the market on one side with sources of production and market on the other. And the northeast, as everybody knows, population is small, there is virtually no industry to speak of. There is very limited potential for trade that northeast can have with China, except for purposes of imports. And if through this BCIN, highways, etc., we are able to supplement our own supplies from mainland India to northeast, that's very well going in for. One other thing in regard to the suspicions that arise about the Chinese taking up investments in various partner countries. If India is willing to accept Chinese investment, why do we say then to our neighbors, you should not accept? Where we have security concerns, like for example Hambantota, there is a lot of, what should I say, misreporting in India that Hambantota was offered to India. It was not. So if Hambantota is Chinese, if you have Chinese nuclear submarines surfacing there, and if that is a matter of concern, it's perfectly legitimate for India to raise that with Sri Lanka, also with the Chinese. But otherwise, if they are developmental projects, and if the Chinese have the money and are willing to finance it, why do we object when we are willing to accept Chinese money for financing our own developmental requirements? This is a strategic goal of national rejuvenation, which of course combines both economic development and military strength. And this is a historical fact that once you develop economically, military strength follows. I don't think I need to elaborate that very much. It's partly in order to protect whatever economic development gains you have made. Partly it is also to project your own power. But this is a historical fact. If it happens with China tomorrow, when we become a $10 trillion economy, it's going to happen with India also. This is a problem area. And the problem area here is that there is no complete listing of what the Chinese call the core interests. Till now it was Taiwan, it was Tibet, but it expanded to cover South China Seas. At some point it would also cover Arunachal Pradesh. It could cover other areas. then what do we do? And there has been a big debate within China on this issue. Should we disclose what our core interests are now? Should we disclose it as we go along when we have the capability to do something about acquiring those, ensuring those core interests? Or should we tailor our core interests according to whatever our capabilities are? That is a debate which has gone on in China. It's not a conclusive debate yet, but we do know, as far as India is concerned, that there are certain problem areas. And that is something that we have to watch out for, we have to be vigilant. This is again, this is part of the internal debate that's going on, the allegations of being Pacific, pan-Pacifism, etc. I won't go too much into this, the text is there. These are the Chinese views, which is both in terms of economy, military, territorial and sovereignty issues, and ideological and technical blockades that major economic powers wish to impose on China. So it's very increasingly complex security challenges. This is how it's described, and then they have given some details of how they see their security situation. These are the fault lines. It's not as if the Chinese don't have their own fault lines, and one very telling statistic is there. This is something which has come out of one of the studies done by one of China's top universities, published in the People's Daily in January this year. Top 1% of households own around 1/3 of China's wealth. The bottom 25% own only 1%. It's a much bigger problem, the social stability issue in China, than it is in India, because we have a safety valve in democracy. So if one party goes, another party comes into power, it's taken as normal. But in China, because CCP wants to have a monopoly of political power, it cannot see itself going out of power. It's very necessary, a social contract with the people, that we give you prosperity in regard to your accepting party control in every sphere of life. That breaks down. And as I said earlier, in the Indian context, it's true in China also, if large enough numbers of people come out, no army, no police can control it. What kind of a global power? I briefly refer to this. What they are saying in many cases is not very different from what we are saying. This is something which is very interesting. This is how the Americans saw the post-war world evolve after the end of the Second World War. And this goes to Roosevelt himself. He talked in terms of 4 policemen. That was the word used. And that's US, Britain, USSR and China. Okay, at that time it was not communist China, it was nationalist China. But still, this is the conception the Americans had. And for those of us who may think that United States can be a reliable ally vis-a-vis China, we should not forget 1971. We should not forget 1998. China was then the chairman of the Security Council in May of 1998, when the UN 1373 resolution was passed. We should also not forget nearer the time 2009, when Obama made his first visit to China. And in that year, in January of that year, Brzezinski wrote a piece which appeared in the Financial Times when he talked in terms of the G2. And the joint communique that was issued in Peking after Obama's visit talked in terms of China and United States jointly managing South Asia. And if you read the transcript of that press conference, Obama talked about it. The Chinese side did not speak about it in the press conference. But the text is there. We protested very strongly. The Americans then sort of lay off and didn't repeat that subsequently. And finally, this is it, that we have to show accommodation towards each other's interests, or core interests if you will. We also have our core interests. And to my mind, the most serious thing that we need to look at is, in the context of the CPEC, what's going on in POK. In that $46 billion that the Chinese have pledged for the CPEC, about $33 billion is for power projects. And if you see the economics of that power project, it seems highly unlikely that it would be able to take off. We don't have the time, we can't go into the details, but there are some very good studies I could refer you to. $13 billion is for infrastructure. And part of that infrastructure is this road that will pass through POK. The Pakistanis have set apart 10,000 soldiers to guard the Chinese projects in Pakistan. This is not going to be sufficient. And while the Pakistani troops might do a reasonable job insofar rest of Pakistan is concerned, if these road and other facilities get built, it's very likely that China will need to deploy its own soldiers in POK. At that point, Kashmir would become not just bilateral, it would become trilateral. And we have to watch out for a creeping annexation by China in POK. And we have to see how that can be countered. And basically, I see this as a matter of dialogue with the Chinese, a continuing dialogue with the Chinese, because I don't know if there is a military way in which it can be countered in POK.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rangachari. Well, we started this session way behind schedule and we remain way behind schedule. So I shall be very, very brief in my concluding observations. I shall make the points really in bullet-proof form in view of the time constraint. So on China's perception of India, the first of the two issues addressed in this session, clearly China does not perceive India as an equal or near equal or a rival. It perceives itself as a near equal and rival to the USA. Not an equal as yet, but a near equal. It views India as a rising power, a major regional power, a fairly influential global power. It's in certain multilateral contexts, in say environmental negotiations on climate change, certain trade or international financial issues, and here it also sees a scope for partnership with India. But India is not perceived as an equal power, nor has China ever perceived India as an equal power. This is not a new phenomenon. It is something which is a constant from the days of the KMT regime. Even when KPS Menon was the representative of India under the British Raj in Chungking, in his dispatches there was constant complaint about the fact that India was not seen as an equal because India was not an independent power. What has changed is this: the basis of the perception of divergence. In the KMT days, it was a question of political status. China was regarded as one of the five big powers after the war. It was a member of the Security Council, a permanent member of the Security Council. India was not. So it was a question of status. In the 50s, it was it was a perception of differences in military power. But what we are seeing in the 21st century is a much wider gap, and that is a gap which includes an economic gap and an increasing economic gap. In other words, it's not simply a difference in military potential, but in comprehensive national power. And that includes, very importantly, the growing divergence in China's economic power. So, and this is not a perception which is unique to China by any means. It's the common global perception of the relative positions of China and India in international relations today. So what are the implications for our relations with China? Very briefly, I'd say it is this, that so far as the border issue is concerned, I don't think there's much of a prospect of an early settlement of this issue. China's perception is that the gap in power is, if anything, growing in its favor. And I don't think it would regard it as necessary to reach an early settlement, because a delay in settlement is not seen as something which would prejudice
the chances of an outcome which China considers more favorable. On the other hand, I expect the relative tranquility which prevails on the border, in border areas today, to continue, because I don't think China either has an immediate intention or sees any interest in disturbing that. And this point was made by Ambassador Kala very convincingly. I will not repeat it. The caveat here is that we do not allow the gap in military power to widen beyond the point, because otherwise it is an invitation to China to try and change the status quo. Coming to the economic side, we have to be very conscious of the fact that the imbalance in political influence in our neighborhood arises largely not only from China's growing military power, but much more so from China's growing economic power. The massive trade reliance in terms of trade, investment flows, and aid, which all of China's Asian neighbors are seeing. And this has shifted the balance of political influence very strongly in China's favor. And I don't think India by herself can rectify the balance. We need to work in cooperation with other major players in this area, including, of course, the United States, Japan, other Western countries. What I'm getting at is this is necessary to have a greater coordination of our approaches in countries like Burma, where we are seeing it now, but also in Maldives, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and things like that. There are, in certain Western countries, you are seeing, there's a multiplicity of national objectives, and these include things like human rights. Now, I think we need a dialogue with these countries to readjust the policies of these Western countries, where there be a greater emphasis on the shared, on the economic, and on the political aspect of these issues, where we have common grounds, common interests with the West. We do not want to see countries like Burma or Nepal or Sri Lanka come under the influence of a single Asian super economic power. You need to see a greater balance in terms of aid, in terms of political sensitivities, etc. So what I'm saying is that the real area where we need a Western counterbalance is not so much the military sphere, where we have to rely on our own strength, as in the political and economic sphere, in questions of aid, trade, investment flows, and generally shaping policies which are supportive to friendly countries in our neighborhood. Maldives is, I think, going to be, the next sort of problem point which will arise in this area. It's seeing major sort of internal stresses. There are questions of human rights which will come up, and there again the question of its relationship with major Western powers and also with India. So thank you very much. We conclude this session, and
Thank you,
go on.
Ambassador Kala, thank you, Ambassador Ramachari, and thank you, Ambassador Dasgupta, for a very shocking exposition of what actually is, what is likely to be in future, and if I may, putting India in its place. Thank you very much. I noticed that we have just about finished our interaction hour. So what we shall do is we shall not eat into the lunchtime any further. I will request the Honorable Minister and President NSK to please come up to the podium. And while they come up,
And is Arpana Dutt here? Please come up and give it a bouquet to the Honorable Minister. Come up to the stage quickly. So having finished the interaction, just now may I request the Honorable Minister to accept the bouquet on behalf of SENESCAPE from Mrs. Arpana Dutt. She is our only lady member of SENESCAPE who is present here today. I will now request the Honorable Minister to deliver his valedictory address. General Shankar Chaudhary, Mr. M.K. Narayanan, the Army Commander, Eastern Command, General Bakshi, all the members of SENESCAPE and all who have participated and all who have listened very patiently. A very good afternoon. When the stomachs are rumbling, I think one has to be short, lest you see more activity which points towards the door. I would like to first congratulate SENESCAPE for this excellent seminar that they have organized. And I'm not saying because it is a formality or because I have been associated with SENESCAPE, because they have put across many views concerning Indo-China relations, be it in the security aspects, be it in the diplomatic field, be it in the economic field. And I think it is important when you are considering your relations with any other country to see all the perspectives before you make up an opinion. And opinions can only be made or judgments can only come out if you consider the whole rather than only a part of the issues that are involved. To that extent, my congratulations to SENESCAPE. I had the opportunity to go to a forum called the GlobeSec Forum, which is done by Slovakia. And in the last 10 years it has become so good that they get presidents and prime ministers and very high dignitaries to attend this global security forum. This time they had one particular session which they had titled Dancing with the Dragon. And they had a Chinese professor there, they had Japanese there, they wanted some Indian views, so they had an Indian there. And it was interesting as to the type of interest everybody is taking in how China is moving, what China is doing, whether we should cooperate, whether we should fare, whether we should take measures that will stall this particular progress that China is making. And that's why this title, Dancing with the Dragon, whether the dance was waltz or whether that was samba or lindo. But the views were very interesting. And views, just like our own country, range from one extreme to another. Today what we have heard again, views were from a point of view where we need to take cognizance of our economic relations, where we want to take cognizance of our security concerns, and where we need to tread a careful path in the diplomatic initiatives that we undertake. Now, for two countries which have had very old relationship, over a period of time, especially one can say the times that the communist regime came into China, the relations have become different. There was a time when we exchanged views which bordered on lot of intellectual pursuits. We also exported our religion. A lot of people came and studied in India and talked about India, to an extreme where we went to war because of certain miscalculations, certain misunderstandings and certain misperceptions. And there is a need to look into this when you look into the future of Indo-China relations. Today, China has an economic clout. India is still striving to get that economic clout. India has got many things. I mean, if I was to look at some of the issues that should concern us, we have got more arable land than China, but only 1/3 the production per acre. Can we do something? We have 40 to 50% or 45% transmission losses in our power. Today the power is surplus. States can't buy it because they don't have the money to buy that power, and therefore you have electricity cuts. How does this improve? Look at China. Things are different. All the people who visit China come back very happy. They feel happy about the roads, they feel happy about the towns, they feel happy about the way the business has been organized, they feel happy about the ease of business. Where China wants a business to succeed, it is eased. Where of course it doesn't want it to succeed, it will be stalled. In our case, there are difficulties. Look at the challenges that we face in our education sector, in our poverty alleviation, in our infrastructure. Now these are some things, these are stones that weigh us down. We need to get out of this before we start thinking that we will be able to make a mark in the economic sector and come up to an extent where we can wield a clout. And therefore, when we compare our relations with China or look into the future of our relations with China, these realities must be kept in mind. Unfortunately, and that's my personal opinion, our great media and at times some of our thinkers jump the gun. The day the DRDO probably says, I am working on a Prithvi 6 which will have, or Agni 6 or something, which will have a range of so much, our papers will go wide and say, India has attained the capability to strike 20,000 kilometers. It's not so. We need to be realistic. And when we start talking like this, I think there are a lot of perceptual problems we create in the minds of our neighbors, and especially China. And that's why when Ambassador Kala said that the media there is totally controlled, I fully agree with him. Because in one of my visits, one of the things that the senior person told me was, can't you control your media? And I said, how do you control your media? He said, look at our media. They say what we want to say. I said, unfortunately, our media says exactly opposite of what we say. It is something, it is a perception. And that is the perception that they carry of India. Just about 2 days back, I was hosting a Chinese delegation as part of a program that we run where we invite senior officials of China to India and along with the delegation. And the mayor of Shanghai was there along with the delegation. And while talking, he said, I find that the roads are slightly, as per my study, the road sector is very weak in India. He says in China, we have got better infrastructure today than what the US has. When I tried to explain the land problems and others, he said, well, in China, everybody feels happy giving land because they feel that once the roads come up, they'll get prosperity. Well, it was very difficult to explain to him that in China, the land is what the government has, in India, the land is what the people have, and it is difficult to construct that type of infrastructure till we ease a lot of other things. But any nation which is striving to attain an economic trajectory has to have an infrastructure that facilitates economic. It facilitates trade, it facilitates the way the goods can move, it facilitates the way the industry can sell its goods out, it facilitates the way the raw material can go out or come in. If that infrastructure is not there, nothing will happen. And my firm belief is that infrastructure does generate great amount of economic activity and prosperity. If you were to take a census of how much of prosperity the so-called expressway would have created, the Taj Expressway or the Yamuna Expressway, you'll be astounded. For 4 years, people were working, people were providing things, people were gaining great amount of prosperity. So we need to look beyond what we have. Unfortunately, I do find that we live in our own shops, everybody looks at his own field and there is less of interaction, and that is why we get walked out. So today, if various programs are given out, they are with a view to the future as to what we can do, and requires a great amount of facilitation from all quarters. India and China, as we look at, will be two good neighbors who have enough place in the world where economics is concerned. And this can only come about if both attain same degree of progress and prosperity. If one is weak, then do not expect that you will have the same type of a status or enjoy the same type of relationship that you want. So this strength must be dependent on or based on your economic strength. Even when you look at the 4 modernizations that China launched, the last one was military modernization. The first 3 were to create the type of economic strength that it enjoys today. And therefore, we need to look at our economy, and along with the economy, we need to look at all other things. There were a lot of issues which were discussed where the security matters are concerned. All I would say is, armed forces are like insurance policy to a nation. Better the policy you want, more you have to pay. Otherwise you will have a weak policy. And this amount has to be spent judiciously in a manner where you can give out your archaic methodologies to come to a modern methodology which takes you forward and gives you value for amount. I was reminded of a particular incident with General Shankar Roy Chaudhary when he was a co-commander, and there was an old buddy of his who had written an article long time back in USI on attack in skirmish order. I don't think very many people who read that had any idea what it was. And it, when he came as corps commander, he said, let's practice this. Well, that was the method that should have been practiced 10 years before he gave this idea. There are a lot of things that are waiting, and today you look at China and you'll notice one thing. China has put its peg on being a peer competitor to the US or excelling it. Everything is geared up that way. Whether it is economics, whether it is relations around the world, whether it is its military and the restructuring of the military. And when I look at security issues, there is only one thing which bothers me. You know, when people are video game soldiers, not actual soldiers, when they are video game soldiers and they start talking macho things, then there is a great danger. Because you do not understand the consequences of war,
or consequences of being a soldier. We have a similarity in what is happening in China today. We've got a lot of very macho talk at a very senior level. It can create problems, especially when the lower lot realizes that you have the strength to do things which they are being taught of. I'll not elaborate on it. I'll leave it to you all to interpret what I have said in the manner in which you want. There is, a lot that can happen between us and China. There is a great amount of investment and confidence building that is taking place. And I say this because I think our leadership is also realizing that we must leverage better relationship to attract the type of investments China can make in a manner in which it benefits us and generates greater confidence. But that does not mean that you have to lower your guard. That must carry on consequent in a manner in which it does not have too much of loose talk which creates problems on the other side. My feeling is that in coming years, if we chart our course correctly and adopt the type of intelligent approach which Ambassador Rangachari said, in a manner in which we can forge cooperation for our benefit, our relations will soar in the manner in which there is a visualization of cooperative existence in both the countries. There are great challenges in China too, in terms of economic disparity and the population that is living below certain conditions, and there is a great amount of mistrust and distrust to the class which is getting a lot of money. And I can again quote you for an example. While driving down from Shanghai city to the airport, there was a car which was trying to overtake cars, a fancy car, and this police vehicle in front would just slow it down. It tried to overtake twice. Third time, I don't know what kind of a signal the policeman gave in the car, stayed back. So we stopped at a particular place and I asked the official who was sitting with me, he said, that chap is a brat, rich parents, lot of money. There is a great amount of jealousy out there, lot of social disparity. And that is why China has its own challenges, just like we have our challenges. We need to see that we cater for our challenges in a manner in which we can come out of them, and we ensure that that gives us the benefit of the type of cooperation that we are seeking. Now with this, I'll say thank you very much once again to all the speakers, to SAMSK and all of you who are here. Thank you very much. Jai.
On behalf of SAMSK, I would like to express our gratitude to the institution for giving me this privilege to propose a vote of thanks. We are most grateful to Janik Bhai Sir, our patron, who inaugurated this thing and gave a useful beginning to the entire program. Sir, we are most grateful to you, our Honorable Minister and General V.K. Singh. General V.K. Singh was not only a great general, but he was also a great leader, and in the time that he has served as a minister, he has done many things which is a mark of history. People from abroad and all that, I think Sir, we are most grateful that you are able to come. And you have shared your views there. Indo-China relations are very important from our point of view. They are our neighbors, there are many problems we have, political problems, economic problems, literary problems, so many problems. And I think SAMSK decided that this is the time we discuss this thread there to see what can be done to improve things. And I think to that extent, it has gone very well. I think we had very useful discussion and very thought-provoking ideas for different people. General Roy told me to try and be brief because the lunch is waiting for us. But I think he has been very clever. The time he has saved my interactions, so I am ready to thank the new speakers. First of all, I think we would like to thank our Honorable Consul General of China, Mr. Wang. Then, of course, we are also grateful to Siddharth Kaul for being a co-sponsor and delivering the keynote address. Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you very much. Sir, our own MP Narayanan, that most of us have always seen in Calcutta recently, and we are very happy, sir, to see you again in Calcutta, and we are very grateful for your very thought-provoking address to this seminar. Harsh, young man, I think the future of the country is very safe in the hands of young men. Harsh has proved that, spoke really well. He's very knowledgeable. Thank you, Harsh. And then we, of course, Edmund Cherokee, I don't have to say anything more about him. He's really conducted a session of program. Mr. Nade, General B.K. Sharma, all of them are so knowledgeable that I think this session, I mean, when they started, I didn't know there was going to be so much material in it. Of course, our own General Mukherjee is also, he's given us NSK, I think gets a lot of benefit from his studies, from his, all that he has contributed to. Lieutenant General, when we have, of course, the ambassadors, 3 ambassadors here, Mr. Karam and Mrs. Gupta, I think they made a very valuable contribution to our ceremony. Now, it is left for me to say thank you to all our guests, our distinguished guests who have come to address us, and all who have been invited here. I would be failing my duty if I don't thank the young gentlemen, young people who have come to address this. Because after all, the purpose of this is to carry forward and give the message to the younger people so that they can carry on. Let us hope and pray that India-China relations will improve and that we have no confrontation and both countries will progress together as a neighbor so that there is a lot of progress in our country and their country and we can avoid conflict, of course, without trying to compromise on our values. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The lunch is waiting for you.
Just one more announcement. All the students after your lunch, please do collect your attendance certificates. And gentlemen in the first few rows, little adventurous, you may please try and follow this route.